Welcome back to the Samong Yang Outdoors podcast. This is week number 4 of the Mule Deer March series that we have been doing. So if you're not up to speed, for the month of March, every single week we have a brand new guest, and we do nothing but talk about mule deer this month. So like the previous 3 weeks here, we have a guest with us. This is Andrew Klander, and we'll get to him momentarily. But as always, we just want to thank the companies that make this podcast possible. The first one being Vortex Optics, longtime partner. And we love them because no matter your budget, they have something for you. And they cover all the categories from binoculars to rifle scopes to spotting scopes, even tripods, binocular harnesses, scope rings, you name it, they have it. And regardless of what product you have, no matter the price point, they are backed by a VIP lifetime warranty. So if anything happens to your Vortex Optics product, reach out to customer service, and I guarantee you they will take care of you.
Second, we want to thank Reveal, especially their Tacticam series. And I'm sure these will come up quite a bit in conversation today because Andrew's big onto the Tacticam and running game cams as well. And that'll be probably one of the topics we delve into. But like we say every week, these are just awesome cameras. Cell cams just in general are great. You get photos to your phone. Tacticams are reliable, high-quality pictures. Pair them with a battery belt or a solar panel, and you get more or less year-round power. Awesome products.
The next one we want to thank is Argali Outdoors. Argali is based in Idaho, and they really focus on equipment for the backcountry hunter. So when it comes to backcountry hunting, you obviously want lightweight equipment, but at the same time, you don't want equipment that is lightweight, but they don't hold up to the elements in the backcountry. And so if you are looking for a shelter or a sleeping bag or trekking poles of that sort, check out argalioutdoors.com. Nate and I, we have tested their products, I think, for about 2 years before we even partnered with them. So like all the sponsors we work with, we usually test, and we test thoroughly their products. And if we like them, and then on top of that, we like the people behind the company, that's when we say yes, and we're excited to have Argali on board for this year.
Last, we want to thank Onyx Hunt, and you guys already all know what Onyx Hunt is. It is just the top-of-the-line online mapping software for the hunter in mind. Has all the good things, all the normal things like public boundaries, private boundaries, burns, timber crops, timber thinnings, all that. Also, just one feature that may come into topic today would be possible private access. And so these aren't public lands, these are still private lands. But Onyx has a hunt for private lands where the owners have listed them as either something that's a fish and wildlife agreement or another lease agreement where you may have access to it with a little bit more research. So that's one of those layers in Onyx that not everybody knows about, and it's great.
Well, before we jump into our guest and our conversation, you guys know what time it is. It is Trivia Duel. And our guest today, for the second time ever,
that's right,
has also provided a Trivia Duel.
I sure have.
So Austin Harris and Andrew are the only two people who have actually prepared a Trivia Duel. And that's not to throw shade at the other guests. We don't make it a mandatory thing to the guests, but it is something we like to bring up. And so since you're the guest,
oh boy,
let's hear your Trivia Duel and see what you got for us this week.
All right. So the first Trivia Duel I have is multiple choice.
Okay.
So the first one is, there's 2 parts to this. First one is, how much weight, percentage-wise, does an average mule deer lose during rut? So your first one is 0 to 10% body fat. Second is 10 to 20% body fat. Third is 20 to 30% body fat. And fourth is 30 to 40% of body fat.
So is this how much of their body weight or how much of their body fat do they lose?
How much of their body fat
How much of their body fat do they lose?
I'm going to go ahead and say D, 30 to 40%.
That's what I'm going to go with too, 30 to 40%.
It's actually 20 to 30% of their body fat that they're losing during rut, chase, and tail.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, that is a significant amount. But the reason why I said 30 to 40 is because we obviously don't get to hunt a lot of deer in the rut just because of how Washington seasons are. But I have had instances where people have shot a fully rutted deer and they open him up and he has 0 fat.
Yeah.
Because it's all gone.
Yep.
And that's probably also like the fat between the muscle and the skin. There's also like interstitial and organ fat and all this other type of fat that maybe they don't lose. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that's also probably going into that.
And one of it might have to do with simply that buck that they shot in particular did not have a lot of fat to begin with.
Yeah.
And so he runs through his fat reserves a lot sooner.
Yeah.
Second part of that is how much percentage body fat does an elk lose during a rut?
Is it the same choices?
1 is 10 to 15%. 2 is 15 to 20%. 3 is 20 to 25%. And 4 is 30 to 40%.
B is what, 10 to 20?
15 to 20.
15 to 20. I'm going to say B. 15 to 20.
Man, you and I have been on the same wavelength because
Well-
that's what I had in my mind.
Ride or die together.
Yeah, I guess so. 15 to 20 is
I guess
what
you
I'll
guys are dying together, unfortunately. It's 20 to 25, and that's equivalent to 1 to 200 pounds a year that they're losing chase and tail.
The reason why I went with 15 to 20, and I don't know what your reasoning is behind it, is because they simply rut in a much hotter time of the year.
Yeah.
Like September is hot.
For sure.
Versus-
Especially those lowland ones that are.
Exactly. And so that's why I just figured they didn't need as much fat reserves to stay warm because they probably can survive without it during September.
But they have all that body fat that they gain while they're growing antler and everything else that
Yeah.
they're going to lose.
Okay, so
crazy.
we suck.
1 to 200 pounds is
That's a
lot of weight to be thrown on and off.
And that's
every
just fat.
Yeah.
year. Yeah,
That's a lot of fat on an elk.
Yeah.
a lot of fat.
Okay, well, we suck.
The more you know, right?
Certified.
20 to 30% on a mule deer and 15 to 20?
20 to 25
Okay.
on an elk.
Nate, do you want to go next?
Sure.
All right, let's hear your trivia duel.
So the NDA, National Deer Association, recommends waiting to eat meat from deer harvested in CWD testing states until the results of that CWD test are obtained by the hunter. Although there's no evidence that CWD crosses the barrier from whitetail or whatever that it is into humans, there's not enough research on the mule deer, whitetail deer to human, as well as if it would manifest in deer the same way as it manifests in humans. So more or less, there's just not enough research out there.
Okay.
With that background, with them wanting you to wait until you receive your results, which state has the shortest wait time for CWD results? Okay, I'm going to give you 4 states. Is it Oklahoma, Montana, Iowa, or Rhode Island?
There's CWD in Rhode Island?
There is CWD in Rhode
yeah.
Island. Yes. Yeah, these are all states that have CWD programs
Confirmed.
testing that
Okay.
ask hunters to send or lymph nodes or whatever it
Is
is.
this a multiple choice or is it just, I guess it's the state.
Which of the states has the shortest turnaround time?
Andrew, do you have an answer?
I'm going to go with Iowa.
Okay.
Okay, I have no experience with Iowa, Oklahoma, and Rhode Island. I do have experience with Montana. And I have experience with Washington and I believe Idaho and Oregon. And out of the states that I am familiar with, Montana was the shortest, so I'm going to go with Montana.
Okay. Smung, you are right. Montana has the shortest wait time in the nation at 7 days.
Yes.
Rhode Island has the longest wait time in the nation at 120 days.
You have to
for
wait
CWD.
120 days to eat your deer.
I mean, that's the recommendation
That's
by
why I
the
said
game
eat
department.
your deer
Yeah.
in quotes.
Yeah. Isn't
That
that
is-
something?
that is
Which is
wild.
funny because I thought with Rhode Island being the smallest state, with most likely out of these states the lowest deer harvest numbers, that might equate to a quicker turnaround time. But the overall U.S. average turnaround time is 29 days. So Montana is significantly above that average, and
Yeah.
obviously Rhode Island is
The
way-
reason
way
why I
slower.
said Montana is because I got my cow elk tested last year. And even when I checked it, I think I checked it within a week and I had my results. And even it caught me off guard. I was like, whoa, that's fast.
Yeah.
Because I submitted Collins whitetail that he shot here. And I think he got it back in like 3 months or something.
Yeah.
Which, I
Crazy.
mean, 3 months is like
I also
pretty
wonder if
average.
it has to do with I don't know anything about this and how long each state has been testing, but I wonder if the longer these states test for CWD,
They get quicker.
they get quicker and they get more efficient at running those tests.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't,
not sure.
I think part of it is going to probably have to do with the idea of how you send it in too. Because, for example, like with how I did with Colin, I took the skull and I dropped it off at one of the drop stations. Whereas the one I did in Montana, I literally had a traffic stop. And so they were able to actually get the material right there on the spot.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming if they did it like that, because Montana, if you just drive through Montana during the middle of the day,
Oh, it's crazy.
they have a lot of those CWD check stations. And I feel like that in and of itself is probably alleviating a lot of time.
Yeah.
So that's what I did with my Montana cow elk, and I got it in like 7 days.
Well, you have some experience
Well,
to
I
bring
got-
into it.
Folks, I got a trivia duel right. It's been a minute since I've got a trivia duel right. I feel good about myself. All right. So my trivia duel for you guys is actually from a viewer. So, folks, if you guys want to participate, you can send in your trivia duel or fast facts to Trivia Duel at syoutside.com. And this is from Alex Scott, and he actually gave me a fast fact, but I'm going to go ahead and go one step further and turn it into a Trivia Duel because his fast fact is simply the answer to the Trivia Duel.
I like it.
So with that said, this is from viewer Alex Scott. Which animal has the highest recorded hunting success rate in the world? Here are your 4 options. Orcas/killer whales, African wild dogs, dragonflies, or Komodo dragons.
It took me 2 options to realize this was not hunter success as the person hunter, but hunter success of the
You're
animal.
you're not
Yes.
the only one. I was like, wait, how does those fit into human?
No way.
To clarify, we are talking about the animal itself hunting its prey,
I was like, who's hunting orcas and how do I join?
not a human hunting the animals I just listed.
Okay, I think I need to hear those
Okay.
answers again in that context.
Okay, so again, which animal has the highest recorded hunting success rate in the world? Orcas, African wild dogs, dragonflies, or Komodo dragons?
Andrew, you want to take a stab?
Not really. I have no idea on this one. I'm going to go with orcas just because they hunt in pods.
Okay.
I know wild dogs usually pick off of what somebody's already killed, so I'm not really a fan of that one. So we're going to go with orcas.
Okay.
I'm going to go with the Komodo dragon because I would say dragonfly, but I don't know how you study a dragonfly hunting success rate, although it seems like it might be high, but I'm going to go with Komodo dragon.
Okay, so orcas and Komodo dragons. So this is now the fast fact from Alex Scott. The animal that has the highest recording hunting success rate in the world belongs to dragonflies, coming in at 97% success rate.
Wow.
Orcas and African wild dogs have about a 90% success rate when it comes to hunting. Komodo dragons actually have a very low hunt success. However, they have a very high strike to kill ratio. Meaning, so Komodo dragons, if you don't know, the way they kill is they have venom. So they go and they bite the animal and they let the venom do its job, even though the deer or whatever runs away and dies eventually. So the Komodo dragon has a low success rate in the fact that it's hard to even get a bite to land on an animal. But once they make contact, most of the time that animal's dying.
So Komodo dragon's the Rhode Island of hunting.
Perhaps, yes. But I just thought it was interesting because I didn't really know that dragonflies were that much of a predator.
That is interesting.
97%. Can you imagine if I had a 97% success rate?
Dude.
This wall would look a lot better.
It'd be a lot better. It'd be a lot more full. But hey, I'll
Absolutely.
take a 50% success rate. It's pretty good. Well, anyways, that's our trivia duel for the week. And like the previous conversations for the past 3 weeks, we're talking mule deer. And this week, before we go any further, I want to let our guests have some airtime here. And, Andrew, just kind of introduce yourself, where you're from, I guess how you got into the whole mule deer thing, and why we're here.
So my name's Andrew Klander. I run AK Outdoors on Facebook, Instagram. I have a YouTube. I don't know how to use it. So I do that. I joined the military right out of high school. I've always been into hunting, never really had somebody teach me hunting. Got out of the military. I did wildfire out of Wenatchee. And a couple guys that I did wildfire with taught me a lot about mule deer, taught me a lot about elk. We would go do scouting missions for fires when really we were looking at deer sign, elk sign, figuring out what they were doing. I was asking lots of questions. So that's kind of how I got into mule deer. And then I moved over to Moses Lake area and prime mule deer habitat. So I spent a lot of time with me, my kids, my wife, just watching mule deer, seeing what they do, watching what they're eating, just learning everything I can.
I mean, the guests that we've had on this podcast, they put in their due diligence to go out and scout ahead of time. But I feel like you kind of take casual scouting to a new level.
Yeah.
Casual scouting meaning like you don't really have a purpose other than like you're just driving around looking at deer.
For sure.
Whereas like the guests we've been having, they go out with the mindset of I'm trying to find one deer or a class of deer, and they kind of stick to it. Whereas you kind of just like, I just want to know what's out there.
The other guys may do that if they lived in mule deer country. But of kind of the guys we've talked to so far, like you said, you're a worker, you have your full-time job, as all the other guys do. They spend most of their time doing weekend warrior type trips over because it's a multi-hour drive to even get into mule deer country. But you've got mule deer country right at your back door.
Yeah, I think I can drive to look at mule deer in 7 minutes from my house. If me and my family are bored one night, I'll look at my wife and go, we have 2 kids at home as well, 2 little boys. And I'll look at my wife and go, you want to go on deer drive? And it'll be like 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, and we'll load up the kids, make sure they have their snacks, because we don't let them be on iPads, but they ask for snacks the whole time we're driving. But we'll just go look at deer, use the spotter. I have pictures of my boys standing outside looking at the spotter while truck's parked in the middle of the road, because I'm not worried about anybody coming out.
So you're in Moses Lake, so do you do most of your hunting, you would say, around there? Like, do you hunt local, or do you travel pretty wide?
It depends on if we're hunting with the kids. We do a lot of hunting with the kids because we don't have a lot of family in Moses Lake to watch the kids. So if, like, my wife is rifle hunting, either we have somebody come out and watch the kids and we try to go somewhere. But if it's like a weekday and I get off work and I'm like, hey, you want to go try to fill your tag? We'll just throw the kids in the car and we'll stay close and try to hunt. Yeah,
and the reason why when we were picking out our guests, you kind of stuck out because you're really the only guest we have that lives around that part of the state. And if you're unfamiliar with Washington, Moses Lake, if you look at it on OnX, I would say like 90% of it's just private property.
For sure.
And so that's one of the reasons why I don't really hunt around there, because access is often very limited. And I just like going to places where I don't have to worry about, oh, there's a boundary over there that I got to be cautious of not stepping over. So that's kind of why you were kind of like a spotlight when it came to this lowland type mule deer hunting, where you might deal a lot of private/public land boundary type stuff. And on top of that, the terrain itself provides a different challenge than, say, high country mule deer or like up here in the Northeast where it's just super thick. And so that's why we're kind of here to pick your brain about that stuff, because that is something that I think quite a bit of people do, because I haven't spent a lot of time hunting sagebrush mule deer, but I did it last year because I drew a doe tag just out this way, and I enjoyed it. I'll be honest, I enjoyed it. Even though despite not having as much public land that I would normally hunt, I actually enjoyed the process of picking these little parcels of public land, and sometimes even these, like you said earlier, like these possible access pieces of property where you might need a hunt or a permission, whether that's through a written note or you have to call them. It doesn't matter. It just provides a completely dynamic of how one approaches their hunt. This buck right here, if you're watching on YouTube, we have a shoulder mount in the studio. He's right between us. And this is your wife's.
That's my wife's biggest mule deer today.
Second mule deer.
Second mule deer, yep.
Is this open country?
Yeah, this is wide open, rolling hills. You have basically no coverage at all.
So basically completely different than all the stories that we have been talking about so far, because Brock, the first guest we had on, shot his buck at 30 yards in thick timber. Austin and Braden, they shoot a lot of like that high country alpine type stuff. And then here you are down in the lowland stuff, hunting just open country mule deer. So before we go any further, and before you share some tips and tactics regarding how you even approach these hunts, let's hear the story, because I think you're a little eager to tell us the story of how your wife shot this buck.
This is a good story. So we were out hunting, and we saw a group of deer, and I was like, hey, let's look at these deer, because every time we see deer during deer season.
And this is general rifle
This
season.
is general rifle. There's Orange Army everywhere. The first spot we wanted to go to, somebody was parked there. We said, well, can't go there. Second spot also had somebody there. Said, can't go there. So then we were driving out, and I was like, there's a group of deer. Pull up OnX. It was actually public. So I was like, okay, they're on public land. Glass them up, 2 points. No eye guards, straight, clean 2 points, which is something we deal with a lot. You find a lot of big 2 points. Like, we've seen 30-inch wide 2 points.
I think Nate and I can agree to that.
You can look as hard as you want at that mule deer, but it ain't growing another point.
Yep.
So we're looking, and there was one buck, and I was like, that's a legal buck, but there's no shot opportunity. So we just kind of watched them. They kind of moseyed on in this little draw, and I was like, okay. And then all of a sudden, this little 2 point comes, another little 2 point comes, and I think it was legal, but it was smaller than this, just barely legal, and it had like a little eye guard on it. I was just like, I can't completely confirm that it's legal. I go, we're just going to let it walk. We'll hopefully find another one. I tell my wife every year, you're shooting the first legal thing I see, because it's the Orange Army. We don't know if we're going to see another one. And so she was like, okay, we'll let that one walk. As we're walking out back to the truck, because we kind of got out of the truck and walked a little bit to see it, the game warden pulls up. And I was like, well, good thing we didn't shoot that buck, because if it wasn't legal, that would have been a story to tell. So we talked to him. He checked her license. Everything was good to go. And then I go, you know what? I want to go back into that same spot. There's a little rock, just a rock in the middle of this tall grass. The tall grass was probably up to here.
Okay.
So I was like, let's just go sit here and watch for a little bit, see what
So
happens.
even though we're talking lowland, there's a couple different types of lowland. There's sagebrush. There's wheat fields.
Yeah, so this was more wheat field.
So you're just talking about like yellow standing grass.
Yeah, basically. That's
Okay.
all it was. Yellow
Okay.
standing grass. There was a little draw that went out, and that's where all the deer went. So I was like, okay, let's see if they come out or if they move.
And is this yellow grass, is this agriculture or is this your wild yellow grass?
This is just wild yellow grass. So we sat on that rock, and we're talking just like me and you. We're not even trying to really be quiet. We're just enjoying time without the kids, just me and her.
Yep.
So we're sitting there, and I have a buddy in his truck, and he's kind of just watching with a spotter from the road because we're probably maybe 100, 150 yards off the road. We're sitting there for probably 10 minutes, nothing. And I feel the wind switch, and I was like, okay, this is over. And all of a sudden, this buck stands up, probably 40 yards from us in front of us. And my wife can't see it because she has the gun set up right there. And I just go and smack her. I go, big buck. And she's like, where? Because she can't see it because the scope is right where the buck is. And she goes, oh. And I was like, she was like, do I shoot it? And it's walking away from us. I was like, don't shoot it in the butt, please. I said, wait for it to turn broadside, and then we shoot it. This buck walks 200 yards away from us, just butt facing us the whole time. She's like, do I shoot it? I'm like, no, we're not going to shoot it. Wait for it to turn broadside, then you can shoot it. So at like 250 yards, it turned broadside, and it starts to like trot. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh gosh. I go, okay, you got one shot. So she shoots it, misses it, clean miss. And I'm like, you got one more shot, and this buck's going in the draw, and we're never going to see it again. So she shoots it, and I couldn't tell. He kind of like jumped a little bit, but I didn't see anything. And then he went on to private property that we didn't have permission for. But the more he walked, the more he was limping. Mm-hmm. And my buddy who was watching on the road goes, I think you hit him. He texted me, I think you guys hit him. I think you hit him in the back. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be a whole nother ballgame. So we watched this deer, and it kind of went over a little hill, and then we never saw it again. And the road went and kind of came around. So we're like, all right, let's go back to the truck, get in the truck, we'll drive around. We drive around, that buck's 150 yards off the road, but on private property. So I pull up Onyx, find the landowner, Google his name.
Is he dead or is the buck dead?
No, the buck's alive.
Oh.
Sitting there just looking at us like, what are you going to do about it?
Okay.
And it's in wheat stubble at this point, so it's just like not tall at all.
Yep.
It can see everything that's going on around it. And so we finally get a hold of the landowner. I'm like, hey, do you mind if we go ahead and kill this buck? It's injured. My wife shot it. And he's like, yeah, go for it. So I was like, okay. So we started walking towards this buck, and I was like, I want to get within 100 yards of this buck so you can shoot it. And she's like, okay. So we just walk straight at this buck, and this buck doesn't move.
And he's looking at you
Yeah,
guys.
he's watching me the whole time.
Oh.
And I'm like, he's got to be injured good if he's not moving, you know, because they're skittish animals. We get to 100 yards. She lays down, shoots it right in the neck, drops, dead. And I was like, yes! Just super thrilled for it because I knew it was a good buck. And we walk up to this buck, make sure it's dead. And I start looking at it, and I'm like, where did you hit this deer? Nothing in the front quarter, nothing in the hind quarter, no blood. And I'm like, what the? So I'm like, all right, let's roll it. As we grab to roll it, I look at the hoof, and she shot it in the hoof, the very first shot. So that's why I didn't want to walk anymore, because its hoof was blown up literally like in almost in pieces in the back hoof. Oh. So it ran 300-400 yards with a blown up hoof, which makes sense on why each step it took, it limped a little bit more, because it was like, oh man, that really hurts, and why it didn't want to get up again. And so we ended up quartering out this deer, and no quarters were harmed. It was in perfect condition.
She shot 3 times.
First shot missed completely. Second shot, it was running, so she was just like, I'm just going to shoot.
Hit
it in the hoof.
Okay.
And then it ran off, and then she was able to do the final shot in the neck.
Okay.
But yeah, just all quarters were perfect. The neck obviously was not very good, but it was pretty wild.
What was your wife shooting?
She was shooting a 6.5.
6.5 PRC.
No, she was shooting the Creedmoor, because we were borrowing a buddy's rifle at the time.
Okay.
So she was shooting a 6.5 Creedmoor, and she liked the 6.5 Creedmoor, but I wanted something with her to have a little bit more power to it, so we got the 6.5 PRC for her, and she loves that gun.
Okay. That's a story that could have ended very different.
Yeah, sure. Definitely thankful.
And that's one of the topics that we're going to touch on this podcast, because frankly, we haven't really had that topic talked about, because Nate and I, we oftentimes don't deal with that issue of having an animal that we have shot at hop over to a piece of private or a piece of land that we don't have access to, because most of the time Nate and I are in the heart of public land. Regardless of which way you look, he can run a mile that way, and you know you can still actively pursue him because it's public land. But like you said, if you spend a good amount of time, it sounds like, you kind of have to be very cautious about where the animal might end up, not just where you shoot the animal, ultimately where he's going to end up, because where you shoot him and where he ends up can be two completely different places.
For sure. And I try to not hunt any kind of close. I try to stay at least 100 yards from any boundary.
Give yourself some buffer.
Give myself a buffer. I have heard of guys that will hunt the property line exactly, and that just instantly stresses me out because, one, I don't want to have to chase it on somebody's property. Two, if I don't have to, I don't want to bug the landowner, because 90% of the time the landowners are also out hunting. So I don't want to be calling them in the middle of their hunt and be like, hey, can I go kill this buck that I shot 10 yards from your property that ended up running on your property? So I try to keep myself a little bit of buffer. And then if it does go die on somebody's property, I will look up Onyx, figure out who owns that property, and then most of the time you can Google their name and their number will come up. And so that's how I'm able to find at least contact information. Sometimes it doesn't work, and then you have to call the game warden and be like, hey.
Since you're on that topic right now, let's touch on that really quick. So to my knowledge, if you look at Onyx and you looked at a property owner and you press on it, you tap on it, it pops out a little pop-up where it shows the address and stuff like that, but they don't necessarily post their contact information on Onyx. What's the step after that to actually get in contact with the landowner?
So once you figure out their name, you can usually Google their name, and sometimes you have to put their address as well, or at least like their general area. Like, say, I was hunting out of Wenatchee, and so this person lived in Wenatchee, so I'd put their name and then put Wenatchee, Washington. And then it comes up with a bunch of people with the same name, so then you got to try to figure out which person you're trying to contact and go from there.
So it's not as streamlined as press this, press that, boom.
It is. It takes research. There's times where I'm like, I want to access this property, and I've spent hours trying to figure out how to contact that person, just to even be like, send an email and be like, hey, can I?
So one tip that could be beneficial is, like, if you know that piece of property that you're going to be hunting, it might be worth the time to do your research ahead of time to at least have the neighboring properties figured out who actually owns it, and maybe even have a phone number.
I definitely recommend that, especially if you are going to hunt close to that boundary line, because it's not if it happens, it's when it happens.
Yeah.
When is it going to run onto somebody's property? When are you going to have to contact the landowner, or if they say no, the game warden at that point?
How many times would you have to say that has happened to you or something you know where you shot a buck on public and went died on private?
I'd say 3 times that I know of between me and like my hunting group.
And what's the success rate of the landowners allowing you to go in? And
100%.
100%. So most of the time.
They'll say no to you hunting, but if it died on their property, they'll be like, yeah, go ahead. They might be a little disgruntled about it, but they will let you.
So I guess context matters.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
If you have a wounded animal or a dead animal on their property,
you definitely want to tell them. You're not going to just be like, hey, can I access your property? Because they're going to be like, no, bye, and hang up the phone.
I think Nate has some things to share, because I think for the first time ever last year, Nate made a diligent effort to actually go and knock on doors.
Yeah, I mean, not in the context of mule deer, but in the context of this private public game conversation. This last year, I made a very dedicated effort to try to get some private land permission close to home, just with some family stuff to do my archery deer hunting on. And it was really interesting because I have, I would say, decent people skills. Like, nothing exceptional, but like I deal with people every single day in my job. I know how to converse. I know how to be respectful, all that. And I just had a very wide array of interactions with people. Everywhere from, get off my property before I go get my gun out of my safe, to getting bit by a dog and getting chased off a property, to like a whole bunch in between of the like, no, we hunt this, we live out in the country, we hunt our own property, or we lease it, to outfitters, all the way to that one person where it's like, there's no way this is going to work. You've done it and you've done it and you've done it, and nobody's letting you hunt their property or kind of giving you that access in. And then my last one of the whole trip to ask property permission for, and It was too good. That's where all the deer were in that one field. I was kind of actually driving by it. I was like, I'm not even going to ask them because that's where the deer are. Half their property's woods, half of it's alfalfa. Like, it's not even worth it. And I went up, and the guy was like, yeah, sure. I don't see why not. And nobody else was hunting it. They didn't hunt it that year in particular. And so it's one of those things where it was totally out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this too, because like this is kind of part of your normal operation, right, Andrew?
For sure.
Whether it's shed hunting or hunting.
I do a lot of asking for private land access just for shed hunting.
Yeah.
And when I ask them that, I specifically tell them, I go, I don't want to hunt your property. I won't even ask. Like, I don't want to be on it during hunting season. This is your property. I go, I just want to hike it in the spring and look for sheds. And most of the time at that point, they're like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Like, I don't care about that.
So you notice a pretty big distinction when you say, I'm just here to shed hunt versus I'm trying to kill a deer on your property.
100%. People are way more lenient to let you go on their property and look for sheds than they are to let you hunt their deer.
And I think that's pretty correlative to your experience.
Yeah, and even outside of just the animal versus shed hunting in Northeast Washington, you've got deer, you've got elk, you've got turkey, and everybody's a little bit different. Mm-hmm. For instance, the property that I got the ability to hunt this last year, they were like, man, just shoot the deer. If you have a second tag, if you drew a doe tag, shoot a doe. Like, we don't like the deer. In fact, I asked them, because they let me set a couple game cams, and I was getting coyotes half a dozen times a day. Said, hey, when I'm out there sitting in my tree stand, when coyotes come through, do you want me to shoot them with my bow? And he's like, no, actually, we like the coyotes because they help keep the deer away. So all good with deer hunting, even better with turkey hunting. They were kind of one of your classic textbook examples of Northeast Washington farm owners that are like, yeah, I'll let you shoot a turkey, but only if you ignore the regulations and shoot 10 of them. And you're going to be like, well, you have that conversation.
Yeah, I ain't ignoring that.
But he was like, if you see an elk come through your game camera, please let me know, and I don't want the property hunted for the rest of the season. Because they knew that the elk in this area are very pressured, find refuge on private land. They personally didn't like hunting elk themselves, and they enjoyed having the elk around, and they wanted elk to continue to be around in the future, which I completely respect.
Yeah.
You know, the same, we have public land not far from us here. I don't hunt deer on the property just for that reason. Like, I think deer need a fair shot. They wanted the elk to have a fair shot, and you know, luckily for me that season, elk didn't end up coming through until the winter. But it was kind of one of those things where I also felt like within that interaction with that landowner, I was able to instill a little bit of confidence, you know, going forward, because I would be like, hey, you know, I'd send them updates, be like, hey, no, you know, no elk have come through, but here's a couple neat deer that have come through if you want to see, things like that. And so it was just interesting that to see, you know, different people have different standards, and I think approaching the private land game with respect that you're asking someone to access like their little piece of property.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's their thing. Like, personally, that is kind of unfathomable to me. I would end up more on the other spectrum, you know, of please no, like no.
For sure.
If you like, I've driven up some long driveways to places, you know, where you have to be very blatantly driving up the driveway, which is kind of why I'm still not completely comfortable with the process and why it's still very foreign to me.
That's why I do a lot of emails, so I don't have to drive down the long driveways.
And I feel like,
especially Central Washington open land, because you're dealing with a lot of agriculture, you're dealing with a lot of farmland, where you may have farm owners with large chunks of land, whether they're contiguous or not. They may be more checkerboarded, but you can have multi-mile driveways in some circumstances where you are fully committed.
Mm-hmm. And then they stop you, and they go, "What are you doing here?" And you're like,
Yeah, speaking on that, like, again, I don't think I have ever gone and knocked on somebody's door to ask for permission. But obviously you guys have. So to talk to somebody who's very green to this, like you just brought it up, one of your common methods is sending emails.
Yep.
And I feel like naturally I would assume as a human, the less confrontational that reach out point is or method is, I feel like the landowner is not as pressured to make a decision on the spot.
For sure.
Right? Because if they read your email, like, they don't have to respond to your email right away.
No.
Like,
I've had people not even respond to it at all, and I'm like, all right, that's obviously a no.
But then that, it's like, there's like zero pressure on them because they can take their time to make a decision whether or not they actually want you there or not. But when you're like face to face and you're asking the question, sometimes it's like, one, they might just be weirded out by it. because especially if they've never had it happen before.
Yeah.
And then the other one too is like sometimes they're not completely comfortable in that situation.
Yeah,
right?
and so something I do and this is something that took me time to figure out, and it's something I started doing towards the end where I had more success. Success being yeses to private property, is I think one of the benefits to face-to-face interaction with people is if you can get past them being uncomfortable with something coming into their bubble of their private property. If you can get past that first little bit, you have the opportunity for them to see you, for them to meet you, to see hopefully your genuine nature about it and in your respectful nature and in that side of it. Whereas with a phone call and an email, that's much more difficult. They don't know who they're talking to. So one thing I did, and this is just if you guys are trying to play the private property game, whether that's from Mule Deer or not, is saying, hey, this, introduce yourself. This is who I am. I'm out here looking for a spot to mule deer hunt. I would love access to your land for these seasons. This is not something I need an answer for right now. I understand that, granting access to a stranger on your property, is a big deal. But here's my number. You try to obviously spend some time in conversing, and then being like, hey, here's my number. Do you mind if I call you in a couple weeks, depending on how far ahead of season you're doing this? This is obviously not a prior to opening weekend thing. And saying, you mind if I call you, at the end of August or in September, and we can touch base again once you've had some time to think about it. And that's another thing, is that I feel like the more advanced you do this in time, the better your opportunity of having a good interaction with someone is. Like, for instance, I have a hard and fast rule, unless it were an instance where I was trying to do some sort of animal recovery, that I will not go door knocking when I'm wearing camo hunter orange during any season. Like, if I'm out hunting, I'm not asking private property permission at that time, because I know as a landowner myself that when and if that happens, that makes it very easy to disregard the actual intentions of the person, because it's just so obvious. It's like, just give me access to your property to hunt. I just want to hunt it right now.
I 100% agree with that. I will not go to somebody's door wearing camo unless I know the landowner already and I'm dropping stuff off. Because I do give them stuff like jerky, pepperoni, salmon, smoked salmon. One of my buddies, he had bees and they had honey. I gave him honey one time. So that's the only time I will stop in camo. Other than that, it is jeans, boots, or hey dudes, whatever I'm in. But definitely not camo, because they know that this is the only reason you're there. You don't care about the person. You're not genuinely wanting.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things where, yes, you want access, but at the same time, it's kind of like, what's the landowner getting out of it as well? I don't think they're necessarily going to require you to give stuff to them, but it's a nice gesture.
Like you said, I always give them a background of who I am. Most of the time, if I'm asking permission, it's usually for my wife, because we do a lot of hunting with our kids, and they're 2 and 5, so they can't do a whole lot of hiking. They're not good at being quiet. So a lot of the time it's driving the roads and glassing their property. And so I'll give them a background on who I am, who I'm hunting with, what we're doing. And a lot of the time, once you tell them, hey, I'm hunting with 2 kids, I am a veteran, I did wildfire, they know that you respect the land and you're not just going to go out there and trash it. And I always tell them, if I see any trash on your property, I will pick it up. I will take it out. I won't just leave it there. I'm not going to litter on your property. Reassure them that I'm not just going to go out there and trash their property.
Yeah, and I think the best way to go about that is what you just described. You don't take it for granted, because those opportunities, when you look at it from the whole spectrum, it's pretty rare to get access.
For sure.
And I think one of the biggest reasons why people stop letting people hunt is litter. Just disrespecting their land.
100%.
And I'm not even just talking about private property where it's like Nate, for example. I'm talking about timber companies where they used to let the general public access, but because people just kept trashing that public access land, they just shut it down.
This is over the counter where we have 2 camp spots. We're if this one's taken, we're going to go here. If this one's taken, we're going to go here. Both campsites, somebody dumped trash, couches, garbage, just everything. And I was working nights. I wasn't going to hunt up there. I tried to hunt over the counter any elk unit this year. It did not work out well for me. But my buddies went up there with a dump trailer and cleaned up all the trash before elk season. They went up there a week prior and just took everything. They're like, why do people do this? But they took the time out of their life to bring a dump trailer over, and clean up all the trash. And that's what us hunters should always be doing. I mean, if you see trash, don't just leave it there. Pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, even the little things. Like when Nate and I walk and we just see a little wrapper or a water bottle, like we pick it up, right? And I don't think that it's necessarily to say Nate and I are a good person. I think that's just pretty average.
Yeah, like it should be.
I think the average hunter out there, if you're just walking out there and you see like especially those, what are those, they call those balloons?
Yep.
Mylar.
The Mylar balloons
The
that people let go.
balloons.
Yeah. Like, I think it's very normal for people to pick that stuff up because even when I'm out and I run into other hunters, sometimes like I'll look in their pack and they just got a little balloon in their side pocket or water bottle. And like, I know they didn't pack that one in. Like they're picking it out. And so like most of the time, like people are like good stewards of the land. But at the end of the day, as the saying goes, it's always the minority that, like the select few that just ruin it for the rest of people.
For sure.
And one thing I also want to mention is even if you don't hunt private lands, but you hunt around private lands on public lands, be very aware of this because this was a couple interactions I had this last year that kind of made me think a little bit more about it. One was when I was knocking doors asking about private, and it was a piece of property that butted up to public accessible property. And they're like, absolutely not. You know, we've had way too many hunters come down into our property that we've been able to sit on our porch with our binoculars and watch them come down into our field and shoot deer. Another on the opposite side of that was this spring I was shed hunting on a piece of public, a small piece of Washington DNR that must not get shed hunted or hiked through at all by anybody because during my time I was there with my daughter hiking around, and one of the pieces of private that it butted up to, one of those houses, people actually got in their car, drove around to my truck and like blocked me in and asked what I was doing. Like, what are you doing out here? You know, are you supposed to be out here type thing? Like them knowing that it was public land, but having it be an area that's not often accessed, wanting to know what I was doing. So if you're on public land, but you're around those private boundaries, to be aware of it and obviously be respectful of that. Because it can be a kind of a tender. I've noticed that private property owners that border DNR, especially DNR, less so national forest, but a lot of times those smaller chunks of DNR, they get mistreated by the small population and their property boundaries get disregarded, and it can make a real sore spots for people.
Yeah, and it doesn't take very much negative interactions to completely shift the mindset of a landowner.
For sure.
It can take one.
Yeah. I know landowners that I've been like, hey, do you mind if I hunt your property? And they're like, no. I've had people shoot my cows before, and I'm like, how do you mistake a cow for a deer or an elk or whatever you're hunting?
Yeah.
Most of these spots are deer spots, but how do you mistake a cow for a deer? Like, that doesn't even make sense. That just blows my mind that people would even try to do that.
Sometimes you don't have words to describe that. It's like, how does that happen? I don't know. How do you describe that?
Yeah.
So you're in these lowlands, and you're mule deer hunting out there, but you're also there, like we were talking about earlier, year-round.
Yeah.
So outside of these kind of evening drives with your family, what does your year for mule deer look like out there? Because this is no secret. A lot of central Washington, a good chunk of them do have general season areas. There's a lot of units. All of the units, obviously, like Washington, the rut is quality hunts. But then there's also a handful of those units that you just never get to hunt. Kind of like elk have the spike only down in the Blues or over in central Washington. You have these quality areas that you may get to hunt, especially, say, in the Moses Lake area and up north of there.
Are we about to die?
I was just thinking, do we have a flood watch
Dude,
going on?
folks, can you guys hear that? It is raining so hard outside right now.
I hope I can get out of the driveway in the car.
It's picking up in the mic.
I was trying to keep my cool.
I was just like, I think we're going to die in here.
That's crazy.
No, just completely off topic, but we have a massive rainstorm that's hitting us right now, and it's roaring. I think you can hear a little bit in the mic.
I'm not complaining about that, though, because we have had a very, very dry...
This rain is very good.
It is great.
Winter. So I'm not complaining about the rain at all.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Anyways, back to your point.
Yeah. So what's your year look like for mule deer? Like, for what you do, and this is something that Andrew and I joke about, like, maybe one day Samong will care about shed hunting. He sure doesn't right now. We'll get him out here this weekend to see what he thinks. But how do you break it down, like, for... You go out there sometimes just to see deer, no intention of ever hunting them. You go out there to look at areas you might shed hunt. You go out there to look at areas you are actually planning on hunting. Like, what's your kind of year look like with mule deer? Because I would say a lot of guys think about mule deer all year. You're one of the guys that I know that thinks about mule deer all year, but you're very interactive with them throughout the year because you do get that opportunity to live in their country.
For sure. And I am very, very blessed to be in mule deer country. Basically from, I'd say, December to April, I'm watching where the bucks are. They're bachelored up at that point. They're hanging out with their boys, watching where they're going, what elevation they're at, just kind of figuring out what they're doing, what they're feeding on.
A lot of this you're doing from the truck.
Yeah, most of the time I have 2 kids in the back screaming. I have to mute a lot of the videos that I post because you hear kids, "Dad, deer," or whatever they're saying in the back seat. They're wild. So, but I'm doing most of this from the truck. Every once in a while I'll get to get out by myself, but a lot of the time it is with the kids, so I don't get to go hiking a lot. But I'm watching just kind of the elevation most deer are at, what they're feeding on, how the winter's treating them, because you can tell just by their body fat if they're having a hard winter. If they're having a hard winter, I really don't try to go until April, even though it's late for dropping. That way it gives them time to be able to gain that body fat. They're not being pressured. There's a lot of people that would start pushing deer in January, and these lowland deer don't drop till, they're still packing right now. So when people are in there moving the deer in January, I'm like, what's the point in this right now? Like, all you're doing is pressuring these deer, and they're not ready to drop for another 2.5 months. So I'm doing a lot of that, and then after shed season, it's watching the growth. So like this year, I don't expect there to be a lot of growth. I expect it to be a very dry season this year. I don't think that's going to help our antler growth at all this year, which is going to suck. But I watch where the legal bucks are hanging out because as I said, we got a lot of 2 points. So I watch where they're hanging out, what draws they're bedding in, when they're going into beds, what time they're getting out of their beds, where they're going for food, because some travel half a mile just to get some food. So I'm watching where they're going, where their beds are, and then come probably, August, beginning of September, as they're dropping their velvet, I'm looking at where they're going now that they're separating from their bachelor groups again, where the does are, because I am lucky enough to hunt one spot that you can hunt the rut, and I hunt archery, so you're able to hunt the rut. So I'm watching where the does are hanging out, because then I'm like, okay, I know the bucks will be here eventually. I don't have to worry about finding them now because they're going to find the girls. So then I watch where the does are, and then it's just a big cycle all over again.
So I have a question for you. So being this lowland stuff, because we do have sage country in Washington that borders mountain ranges, especially like up for instance, the Okanagan Valley, right, where you have a very wide discrepancy in elevations, and you might see them down in the lowland during the rut. Do you still see any sort of either migratory or movement patterns with deer during that winter time, even though there's not a whole lot of change in elevation? So the snowfall might not be that different from the top of the hills to the bottom.
Those does want no part of snow, from what I've seen. So during the rut, those bucks will migrate down, and then as soon as rut's over, they go back into the snow. Because they want to be away from people just like we do.
That's even if the snow's just 600 or 800 feet up a draw above the fields.
They will get away from the does. They will try to just mind their own business, especially after the rut. They're tired. As we all learned today, they lose quite a bit of body fat, so they just go relax, gain their body fat, eat.
Yeah, I think this is a very unique type of herd that you're hunting, because one thing that we have learned talking with Brock and like the high country studs is they have a very habitual pattern based off the topography, right? But where you hunt, because let's be honest, the geography and the topography, it's not all that different from over here to over there. How do the deer actually migrate?
They just go as low as they can. So they go down to orchards. They go down to, if somebody plants winter wheat, they go into the winter wheat fields, and they will just live in those winter wheat fields.
And this is during the winter time?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the same way, I guess it's kind of true for high country deer, because they eventually have to get out of the high country when the snow's too bad.
Yeah, for sure.
But how far are your deer traveling, though? To go from so let's say there's an orchard field or whatever they're trying to go to winter. Like, how far are they actually traveling? Because I feel like miles-wise, that country can be very big, but at the same time, there's a lot of orchards. So how do they pick an orchard to go to?
It just depends on which one's planted, which one still has apples, if they pick that orchard clean, if they have green grass that's growing in between the orchards, if it's just rocks, there's a lot of variables depend on what orchard they're going to choose that year. And I've watched them go into one orchard one year, And then the next year, they want nothing to do with that orchard or that field. Even if it's planted the same exact way, they go, I don't want that. And they'll go a mile down and go into a different one.
And some of this is obviously it's difficult to know what the deer are thinking, but there are lots of deer herds out there that will have their migratory pattern. These are migratory herds that migrate to winter range, and they will pass by viable winter grounds during their migration to their winter range, even if they're passing by ag fields or orchards or whatever that feed is, at the same elevation. I feel like we're kind of talking about here is almost more of a resident deer herd.
For sure.
Talking about deer herd in the context of like central Washington lowland deer in general, like that herd, to whatever they think is their closest viable food source, because you're not dealing with the mountain ranges and the elevation change and everything that you may deal with in other areas of the state or in other states. For
sure. The herd doesn't move far. I've seen deer move less than a mile from where I watched them during summer to where they are now. Like, especially this year, with how little snow we've had, they haven't moved much. They don't need to move much. They have everything they need right there. And then some years, they're all in one field. Like, I've looked at a field where there's 400 or 500 deer because they all go to the same spot. Yep. But you could look at a green field that's literally right next to it, and they want nothing to do with that green field. You're like, what's wrong with this green field when there's 500 deer in this green field? You're like, you could go have your own field all to yourself.
Yeah, so I think that's the best way to draw a distinguishment between what you're hunting here versus like what the high country people are hunting. Because in the high country, you're hunting migratory deer, meaning they're there in the summer, maybe early fall, but once November hits, they're gone.
Yeah,
because either there's a physical aspect, meaning the snow's too high, or they're just trying to chase a doe, and the does are all down low. Versus yours, it seems like there's a pretty good base of where a lot of these animals spend their entire lives, I would assume. So with that said, it's like, would it be a safe bet to say that if you found a buck that you wanted to shoot in July, you're going to be looking for him not too far from where he is in July, in, say, in October or November?
I have, I'd say, probably 3 spots that I can watch a deer in the spring, a buck just start growing, and he'll be in the same spot in the fall.
Really?
Maybe 2 draws over. I mean, the stuff I'm hunting, it is draws. There's big, deep draws that you're hiking into, but they'll sit in that same draw all summer long.
Is that, would you say, is true across the board, or at least the majority of it? Because they kind of have everything they need. They have their cover, they have their beds, they have their feed, they have their water sources nearby, where they just don't really find a need to travel far to get what they need during that season?
What I've seen, yes.
Yeah.
They don't need to move, so unless they have deep snow, they're not gonna move.
Here's another question for you. So up to this, the guys that we talk to that do deer, like we said, high country or Northeast Washington, where we've had some interesting discussions around water and how much they value water. For instance, Brock Wylop, who we had on the first week, puts very little emphasis on water because the vegetation that they feed on has so much water content in it that he doesn't think they really even go to that water much in the way he hunts them. And with the high country, water's a little bit more of a discussion, but it's a completely different context in this lowland desert area where you can get very dry, especially like looking forward to this year. Now, this is also an area where there's a lot of cattle range, there's a lot of agriculture, there's a lot of irrigation. And so it's kind of funny, like I spent this last fall out there on a muzzleloader tag with my dad.
That was a fun hunt.
It was a fun hunt, yeah. You were out there for a little while. And there was more water than I thought there would be, at least in the area we were hunting, which was public, only public, from cattle watering basins. Like wells that were dug to big metal, like almost like what I've never done that.
Water tanks.
Yeah, water tanks. The type of stuff people talk about with pronghorn hunting, out in the plains. But there was a lot of them. Like to the point where a deer within a mile might have, and this was just this specific area, may have 3 or 4 different options of water source. Do you feel like that is true for a lot of that public ground out there in central Washington? Or do you feel like hunting those water sources is maybe a more viable tactic because the overall water content is less out there?
I feel like there's a lot of water due to people running cattle. Most of the spots I hunt don't have any sort of water source, but they have the cattle. So they have those water troughs that you're talking about, the big round things, and they just go straight to that and get it from that. But I also think, as Brock talked about, that they get a lot of their water from their food. Even in the dry areas, I think that sagebrush holds that water, and they're able to eat whatever they're eating and get the water from that too.
Interesting. Yeah, because it's when you have those deer watering from the cattle draws, like it's a lot of water. They don't need to be there for long.
Yep.
They can hit that for 20 or 30 seconds and get a lot of water in and really not be very present around those water sources like you might think they would be.
So that specific area where you hunted, I did find a spring in the spring, and I put a camera there because I'm like, there's got to be deer that hit this. This is the only water, like natural water, that I know in this area. And I got maybe 4 does in about a 4-month span of having a camera there.
So this sounds like it's obviously it's a very developed area, right? You're dealing with a lot of agriculture, you're dealing with a lot of ranching and stuff like that. So it sounds like they're not necessarily maybe naturally used to a small home range, but because of the benefits that people have provided them, they just have adapted and found no reason to expend energy to travel significant distances to go get water sources. And so that's why it's safe to say these are now your like resident herds.
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. And another thing too is it was something that I felt like I had done a decent, and this was an area, I'd been in the general area before this last fall, speaking in the context of my dad's muzzleloader hunt, but I hadn't spent much time in this exact area, and definitely not time hiking draws and stuff. And I thought I had done a pretty good job Onyx scouting this area, but I didn't pick out those water sources on Onyx. So it was one thing I kind of went into knowing that during our hunt there wasn't really any snow, that maybe the does would be a little bit more centered around the water sources. But then once I ran into them in person and went back on Onyx and found them, I was like, okay, now that I know what I'm looking for, like there's a lot and it's pretty obvious. So it's just, if you are thinking of hunting that lowland area, keep it in mind, but go on Onyx and see what you're looking for, because it was surprising to me.
Yeah, I think I have very limited experience hunting that lowland stuff, but even just with what I got to do last year, I kind of found everything that I experienced on my hunt to be true with what you guys have been saying. I mean, I literally saw probably 1,000 deer in 3 days. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about, like hundreds of deer crowded in a little field.
Yep.
And then across the highway, it's like there's nothing. And then you'll drive for a few miles. Maybe you'll see like a couple deer here and there. And then just a random jackpot. 200-300 deer just kind of around this irrigation system, whatever they're eating. But then at the same time, like I didn't really find from the road, obviously, because I couldn't access those private property, there wasn't really like any noticeable pieces of water.
Yeah.
But clearly those deer know of some water somewhere, and they obviously like somewhere. So it's like, it's weird to say because it seems like these deer are truly resident in the fact that they don't have to move far. But at the same time, I feel like they go one step further and they're selective of where they want to be resident to, not necessarily out of what you might think they might need.
One thing I've also found is there's specific pieces of land that somebody will run cattle year after year after year. And you can tell those spots because it is just beat up. Those deer want nothing to do with where those cattle are. They will avoid it like the plague because those cows go through and they wipe out all the feed. I don't know about other places, but what I've seen is if you find a spot that those cattle have either recently been on or currently on, there may not be a lot of deer on that specific piece of land because those cows are going to push those deer out of there and eat all that food.
That's interesting because where I ended up shooting my doe, there was probably like a herd of like 100 cows with them.
There was.
And they were like all intertwined, but the difference is like on that little piece of public, that was the only sagebrush in that area. It's because that's where what I have come to learn was they were bedding in that stuff, right? Because when I'm saying sagebrush, I'm not talking about like knee-high sagebrush. These were like taller than us sagebrush.
Yep.
And so the moment that those deer went in there, like you couldn't even see them anymore. But then when it came to like feeding time in the evening, when they started getting up from their beds, all of a sudden, like they start distributing out to these private properties. So to kind of maybe tap onto what you're saying, so the cows that we were dealing with, they were strictly on state land or public land.
Yep.
And I feel like the deer, like you said, the cattle might be feeding in that piece of public, but the deer weren't competing for that same food source. So they were using it as a bed, but when they went to go eat, they were eating on the neighboring properties.
For sure.
And so I think that that's one thing that you might want to take into consideration if you're trying to plan a hunt around this stuff is like, don't just disregard if there's cows on the place where you're hunting at, because they could very well be coming into that to bed and going out from that to bed, because that's exactly what we saw.
That's what I've seen a lot too, is they will bed in the same areas that the cows bed are eating in, but they don't want to eat in that spot because they don't want to fight the cows over because they're not going to win.
Have you seen cows bully deer around?
I've seen them kind of, nudge their head at them, and
Really?
the deer are like, all right, I'm out of here, and they'll walk the other direction.
Oh, really?
That's funny.
I actually had early archery. I was chasing a deer, and I spooked it a little bit, and I was like, okay, it's not spooked too bad. And it ran up top, and the cows were on the other side of the hill. And then it really took off when it saw the cows, and I was like, oh, no.
Man, they really don't like the cows. That's so funny because when I hunt a deer camp, it's a place where they let a lot of cows run. It's a grazing area. And it's funny because I always joke that if I find the cows, I'm going to find the deer. And for whatever reason, it's pretty true.
And I think food source up there is just endless.
It is also endless because you're talking about more like mountains at this point, not your little draws that you're talking about. But I feel like part of the reason why those deer up in the highlands might gravitate towards cows is also for herd safety. I feel like when they're around other ungulates, like cows, like for example, I feel like it would make sense that they feel a little bit safer than if they were off on their own.
For sure.
But I don't know.
Your talk about sagebrush, too, is a good transition to something I want to get your ideas on, Andrew. And when people think about Central Washington deer hunting, Washington has a lot of extremes, right? Like you have your blacktail hunting on the west side. And so for those guys driving, whether it's I-90 over through Moses Lake and Ritzville or up from Wenatchee over kind of through the Okanagan Valley, you see the Central Washington, you see that lowland area, and it seems like you'd see every deer out there, right? Because they're used to hunting where you can't see more than 5 or 10 yards max. And then for us over here, we're hunting northeast Washington where there's a lot of old timber, there's a lot of thick timber. We're hunting big woods again where you're more going to glassing vantages and your glassing openings. When you spend, a little bit of time going through Central Washington or through those lowland areas, it might seem like you've got your sage and you've got your ag, but there is huge diversity in the country between, yes, you have your sagebrush flats, you have your agriculture areas, but then you have this whole Columbia Plateau area where you may have agriculture up on top, but really aggressive steep draws down on the sides and these deep kind of isolated guts. And then you also have your basalt cliff areas and your rocky areas and your shaly areas. And so the deer have quite a diversity of landscape. And in some ways, I would almost argue that there's a lot more diversity in the areas that deer live in Central Washington than something like Northeast Washington, where okay, mule deer are going to be pretty high and they're going to be in the trees. There's a lot of diversity in the Columbia Plateau. So how do you kind of approach, I know that one of your biggest mediators is public access, but that's not true for every unit. There are some units that are highly public, but that still have a ton of diversity. And I know a lot of people talking about their philosophy is kind of just like, get as close to private or get as close to the agriculture fields as possible. But there's a lot more to that than finding deer out there. What's kind of your approach knowing that there's all these different kind of landscapes that you can find deer in?
Just glass. That's why I do a lot of deer drives. I glass lots of draws. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense to me on why that deer's there. I will look at a draw sometimes and I'll be like, there's nothing here, but there is a good buck in there.
You use driving to your advantage.
Yep.
A lot of guys have a negative connotation with access through hunting areas. If they look and they see that, there's a road every 800 yards or so, there's not going to be deer there. That's not necessarily your approach. It's kind of accepting that people might see these deer, but there's still viable hunting opportunity here.
I would say a lot of the people that drive the roads don't see the deer because they'll just drive, put up the glass real quick, be like, all right, nothing's here, move on. Or they'll go, nope, don't see anything, or, it's a doe, and just go. Where I've watched deer go into draws and not come out, and I'm like, I know this deer's here. And it's taken me 15, 20 minutes to find that deer in the draw that I watched it go into. They're very good at camouflaging. They know what they're doing. And sometimes all you catch is a tip of an antler move or a flick of an ear or the sun hit the deer just right to where you're like, that's not normal. One of the guys that's taught me a lot has always said, it's like somebody breaking into your house. You're going to know all the accesses. You're going to know all the hiding spots. You're going to know where to go to not be seen. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, if somebody broke into my house, I know exactly where I'm going to hide. I know where I'm going to put the kids. I know where all the little nooks and crannies of everything is. Where somebody that's coming in, driving, 5-6 hours away, don't know those little corners.
Yeah, and so this was something, again, I haven't spent a whole lot of time out there, but I did have this hunt this last fall with my dad, and that was kind of my first real chunk of time during a hunting season, not with a tag in my pocket, but with someone with a tag in their pocket. So we were approaching the land and the animals like hunting, not like shed hunting, not like scouting. We were approaching it as a hunt. And one of the things that I usually put a lot of emphasis on and I look at a lot on Onyx is the roadless areas layer. For those that you don't know, well, if you put on the roadless areas filter, you'll have this kind of purple circle. And everything in the purple circle, inside the purple circle, I believe is more than 500 yards away from any sort of access. It might be a little bit more than 500 yards. Is it 500?
It's about, yeah.
It's about 500, yeah. So it's kind of a quick look on when you're scrolling through Onyx and scouting of like, oh, I can go into this area and at least I know it's me walking in there and I'm not going to get in there and there's going to be someone driving by. There's a lot of those areas in central Washington where you'll have the vast majority of a unit that has no roadless areas, according to Onyx. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was very easy to my mistake to be like, we're just not going to go there. And it took me a portion of that trip to figure out that, like, this area still has, relatively speaking, you know, roads all over the place. But there's still like significant advantage to the guy that gets out of the car and goes in. Even if that's only like in some instances 100 or 200 yards off the road.
For sure.
I mean, the amount of landscape you don't realize that you're not seeing. Mm-hmm. Like you were saying, we're not talking about knee-high sage in a lot of this. A lot of this is 5-6 foot sagebrush where even a standing deer, you may not see it. There is huge advantage there.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things I realized doing my doe hunt last year in this type of country is from the start, there's already a misconception that like you can see everything. What people think is like they think open country, I can see everything because I can see a lot of country. That open country you're looking about, you're probably looking about like max 20% of what you can actually see. Sometimes less.
100%.
Because what people are mistaking this what we call scabland type stuff where it's like, yeah, you can see the top of these, you know, whatever is a hill or something, but you can't see those little nook and crannies between every little rolling hill. And all it takes is a little 2 feet bump sometimes to fully conceal a bedded deer. It doesn't take a lot of contour to fully hide a deer because some people are thinking of looking at the scabland as almost looking like a flat park. Imagine you go to a park, right, and you can just see this giant field. People are thinking that it's the same thing out there. It's just like, oh, if there's a deer out there, I can see it. But what they fail to realize is there's so many little just nook and crannies, little draws, little gullies.
The topography out there is just wild.
It's insane. And so one of the biggest misconceptions I thought was I'm just going to get to this really high point because that was my first day out. And when I got up there, when you didn't throw up the glass, it's like, if there's a deer here, I'll see it. Yeah. But then when you sit down and you put that bino on the tripod and you start actually like picking it apart, you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, there's a lot more country.
Nate saw that while we were out with his dad for that hunt too. Like we would stop somewhere and I'd glass a little bit and I'd be like, oh, there's a deer, there's a deer, there's a deer. And they're like, where? And I'm like, it's right there. How can you not see it? And they're like, but I've done this for 4 years now, so I'm pretty good at like finding, picking them out. But if you don't do it all the time, it gets difficult.
I've heard this. This is one of those things where we talk about listening to stuff and like absorbing information and then comparing that to boots on the ground and the experience that brings. And like I've heard people talk about this, like especially in the context of Wyoming, eastern Montana, those type of plains. You know, I would hear, oh, you think you can see everything, and then you go out there and you don't realize how much topography there is. And then I went out there and I was like, oh no, like this area, this is like bordering a wheat field. I can actually see everything. They're talking about other stuff that has a little bit more topography. But it honestly is not the case. I did that a couple times where I would walk around that wheat field and you'd find 4 or 5 or 6 draws. And I remember one specific time where there was a field where I was like, I can see everything. I am a significant bit of elevation above this field. I'm looking down into this field, and I can see everything.
Yeah.
And we then went about, 100 degrees around the field, so went from about 12 o'clock down to about 4 o'clock, and there was a little draw with about 6 deer in it. And it takes, if you have a bedded deer, even if you have a bedded deer, for instance, in a winter time, in like a scouting time or a shed hunting time, in a harvested field, there's no alfalfa, there's no sage, there's no grass. It takes 2.5 feet of undulation in the hill for a deer to be hidden. And so, like, I can't overstate it enough. Like, you cannot see everything in this area.
Yep.
Put boots on the ground, make little changes, just like you hunt a burn, where you can move 4 or 5 feet to your left and get a completely, like, new view of another hillside because all of those trees shift a little. Do the same thing hunting out in the sage.
I have come to the realization that I glass harder in that open country than I do like up here, like logging clear-cut country.
100%.
And I will even go one step further. It's a lot easier to get lost in the scablands than it is in the mountains. And the reason why I say that is because, again, when people see open stuff, they're like, oh, they feel safe. Like, oh, yeah, I can see everything, right? But this happened to me and my cousin. We were just out by Sprague. We were upland bird hunting. And when I say upland bird hunting, we're just walking around with a shotgun. That's what we were actually doing. And the thing, like we parked the car and we're just hiking up there. And to you in the moment, you don't feel like you're really covering country because it's like you just feel like you're gliding on top of these hills, right? And then at some point, like after 2 hours, if you're like chasing these birds around, all of a sudden, like I'm looking around, I'm like, I have no idea what direction our car's at. Because everything looks the same.
Yep.
You don't have a landmark that says, oh, this is north. Stupid me that day. My phone wasn't charged. I was like 4%. And I'm like, I don't even know where my cousin is. I don't even know where the cars is. The only good thing about that is we were hunting a pretty small chunk of public. So like at some point in time, I was like, I'm eventually going to hit a road. I don't know what part of the road I'm going to hit, but I'm going to hit a road. But in that situation, because there are, like you guys said, there are some pretty good parcels of land where it's pretty much roadless for a good several amount of miles. And it's easy to get lost. But the reason why I specify glassing, I glass harder is because you don't want to think the easy way out and say like, I saw everything. Because in Wyoming, when I was in Wyoming, we're hunting kind of like these rolling hills. And one thing I have learned with these mule deer, especially in the summertime, because there's not a lot of trees where they can go and hide, they have some of the craziest beds I have seen. They will dig out beds. And we had this one instance where before I had shot my deer, literally about 30 minutes before I shot my deer, our editor, Chris, he found this elk shed. He spotted this elk shed up on this little spine of this ridge. And he's like, hey, I want to go pick up that elk shed. So we drive over there. And so I go down with Chris. And then Chris Ock, Remy Warren's camera guy, he goes down this little draw. And in beneath this draw, it's only like maybe 20 feet high on both sides. But at the bottom on the left side, there was like a little... Like imagine you have a flat stone and somebody just shoved it on the side of the ridge and then they dug out like a 5-foot hole in it. And there was a 2-point mule deer buck tucked way back in there. And the moment Chris Ock was like, because he saw the cave, he's like, oh, that's a really cool spot. He went in there and this 2-point came flying out and like almost trampled over him. And he ran over and he jumped my buck from his bed that we literally drove over. My buck, he's a big buck. And he was bedded behind this two pieces of sagebrush that we literally drove by like 300 yards like 5 minutes earlier. And he took off. That's when we located him. And then we're like, okay, this is what these deer are doing. And then I went over and shot them.
So going off of that, we've had times where we've been sitting, or not we, people I hunt with, they've been sitting in one spot and he likes to have a beer when he drinks. So he'll pack beers with him. And he was sitting in this one spot and the sage was tall and he was like, there's no deer here. He cracked a beer. And the moment he cracked that beer, a buck stood up like 5 feet from him. Mm. And he's like, I just walked in here, made all this noise. This deer didn't move, but they try to hunker down in that sage until they can't or get too nervous. And then they're like, I got to go. And then they go.
And it's true.
And they will pull. And this is something I was going to kind of transition to talking about pressure in the hunting season out here. And this is something you feel like those deer will do out there? Because this is something we noticed on your doe hunt this last year, is these deer will hold their nerve until they really feel like they can't. And a lot of times we're talking about single-digit yards, like 2 to 3 yards away.
You remember that 2-point?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm referencing here.
Yeah, so on that hunt, this was the craziest. It scared me, bro. I was so scared. So, again, this was after I shot my doe. We called Nate down that morning because it's the last day of season, right? So Nate came down and like you, dude, 2 points everywhere. Like it was 2 points galore. Mm-hmm. Every buck is just like, we're just trying to find a nub. And so we sat there, I don't know, like 6 hours or something. We have like 2 hours left of daylight. I'm like, let me go check the backside of this property because we haven't seen everything. Because that's the other thing that's deceptive about this country is when you look at it from Onyx Hunt, you're like, it doesn't look that big. But then when you start hiking
it's huge.
It's huge, right? And so I go to the back, I see a coyote. I'm like, all right, that's cool, whatever. And granted, the coyote's standing. I didn't have my gun because I left my gun at the truck because I already shot my doe. I'm like, all right, there's a coyote. So I go down where the coyote was, and I come back, and there's, again, we're in like sagebrush country. So imagine like I'm walking through the little mazes between the sagebrush. There's a clump of sagebrush, and it's only about 10 feet by 10 feet wide, but it's just super tall sagebrush. I'm walking right next to it, right? Going back to where Nate and them were. Didn't think much of it. But then I came across this hill, which is only like 30 feet tall. But I was like, you know what? I don't want to slowly hike. Let me get some momentum and run my way up there. The moment I started running, this buck who had held his nerve in that 10 by 10 foot sagebrush clump gets up. Like, he literally jumps up and he starts booking it. And obviously, I'm scared. I'm like, what in the world is that? Because I don't even know if I had my handgun because I just saw a coyote. I don't know what this is. Is this a mountain lion that's ambushing for something? Well, obviously, it turns out it was a buck, and I looked at him. He ran out to like 100 yards, turned back, looked at me, pulled out my phone, got a little footage of him, just again, clean, solid forky. And I'm like, Nate, got another buck for you. He's another forky, sorry. And then I go back. But I think one of the reasons, like what Nate was saying, is like these bucks, they hold their nerve because in the instances like that they're like hiding, they're extremely hard to find, locate, glass, whatever. But let's be honest, at the end of the day, it's open country. So if they have to run from one ridge to the other one, they're exposed a lot of the time. And if there's a rifle hunter sitting there, guess what? He's going to have multiple opportunities to take a shot at that buck. So one of I feel like their defense mechanisms is just to sit still.
Well, and they, like we were talking about with me driving, they're used to people driving all the time. So they're like, if I just sit here, they're not going to see me, and it's the same with my wife's buck. We sat there for however long until that buck stood up, and he was like 40 yards from us. We had no idea he was there. But he held his nerve until he was like, I got to go. I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's true because throughout that day, I mean, Nate showed up around like 10 o'clock or something. And then it was a pretty warm day, too. I think it was like, I don't know, 50s, 60s degrees. And so, like, it was pretty hot, right? Like, even we were in T-shirts hiding underneath a piece of sagebrush for shade, right? And around 10 o'clock, like, that's when we noticed, like, man, there are no deer out here. Because you have to understand, from first light when I first got there, I mean, we saw literally about 100 deer, like, slowly funneling back into this piece of public that we were hunting. And from, like, 10 o'clock to, like, about 4 o'clock, we'd say, like, yeah, you'd see, like, an occasional deer that might have been, like, relocating a bed or two. But, like, when 5:30, 6 o'clock hit, like, everywhere was crawling with deer. If you were just driving by around, like, at noon, there's no way you would have guessed like, there were that many deer just
you'd
in
have
that
no
pocket.
idea.
No idea. And I think that's one of the reasons why these areas, their reputation, depending on who's hunting it, is so different. Because somebody who's not hunting it, in my opinion, properly is just like, yeah, there's no deer out there.
Yeah.
And then somebody who's actually spending the time, and sometimes in this case, you don't even have to spend a lot of time. You just have to spend more time off the road and a little bit more time glassing the right spots to realize, like, there are quite a bit of deer here.
I can show up to, as I said, about 3 draws, and 90% of the time the deer is in that draw. Even though I know he's going to be in there, it takes me 10 minutes to locate it. And I'm like, I know you're here. And then all of a sudden I'll catch an ear flick. Or another big tell that I've found is crows sometimes will circle the deer. So if you're sitting there and you're like, well, that's weird. The crow is just sitting here going, caw, caw, caw.
Like magpies will do that too.
Yeah, sometimes there's a deer bedded there, but you would have no idea if you weren't paying attention to those clues that Mother Nature's giving you that something's there.
And I feel like this is maybe where the behavior of mule deer in this area of the state differs from mule deer in the high country or in Northeast, like where we hunt them. In that area where we hunt them or in the high country, they know that they can get away and get to safety from predators by running. Yeah. They can get over a ridge top. They can get down into some thick woods. They can do something like that. And this is not to say that the deer in Central Washington don't run, because they will absolutely run.
Yeah,
however,
you've seen it.
Yeah, I've seen it. However, like with their bedding on deer in the high country, for instance, they'll bed where they can see really well. This is where I think in Central Washington, where you have these sage flat areas, you will have deer that will bed with the wind as their number one tell for their safety, but they may not have even their own vision very far until something's very close to them, like these deer that blow out when you're just a couple feet away from them. And so I think that the safety that they find is not in running, it's in the hiding down. Very similar to blacktail, actually, in some ways. I've glassed deer before in these sage flat areas where they're up and then a car will kind of come into the distance and they'll bed down or they'll drop their head. And then once that car has gone by, they're back up. And if that car was looking for them, they never would have seen them. They use those tiny little landscape pockets to be their safety, not the ability to cover country and cover ridges and draws, because there aren't as many of those. And so one thing you might think about is, like, middle of the day, like you talked about in our season, we had a good 6-hour chunk of the day where we weren't seeing deer sitting and glassing. And if you have enough country that you're not blowing out the country that you're glassing for the evening, you might think about still hunting this country, and not still hunting it in the idea of like covering, just going through as much sage flat until you find a deer, but going through it with the mentality that it's going to take me still hunting and getting in within a couple yards of these deer before they may jump up. I might see one like 80, 100 yards away if the wind switches or swirls or they decide to rebed. But otherwise, they're bedded and they're holding their nerve.
It's almost like upland bird hunting where you got to step on top of them, flush them out. And then if you're rifle hunting, I mean, you got to make a pretty quick decision. Granted, it's open country. And the one thing I have found with these deer is like they do see a lot of people.
Yep.
And the one thing that I have learned with just last year is like you will jump a deer and they'll usually run a little bit, get a pretty safe distance, and they usually turn back and look at you for a good minute or two.
Yep.
Even that buck that I was just talking about that I was literally like 10 feet away from, even though I was as close as I was, like he ran out there. He looked at me for a good like 20 seconds before he decided like, I don't want to be here. And then he just trotted off. It could be a viable option where if like you said, there's these certain pockets of sage where the deer could be better. Let me just go and walk up on these sage and do a quote unquote still hunt, or what I would deem more of a flush hunt than a still hunt. But
I would say if you're going to do that, though, definitely take your time and do like a step or two. Stop.
And that's what I'm saying is approach it more almost like Westside blacktail hunting, where you're still hunting this, but you're moving really slowly, even though your mind is still telling you can see everything, because you can't. And go slowly through that country.
Like, have you guys ever like you're walking back to your truck or something, like the road's right there, but you're off the road and there's a car coming. You're like, I gotta hide. I don't want him to see me.
Yeah.
And so all you do is like, you literally just sit down and there's hardly any contour between you and the road, and they drive by and are completely clueless.
So I actually saw this year. We weren't hunting mule deer at the time. We were just kind of looking around, and I took this corner and I saw it was a nice 4-point. And I was like, okay. And I glassed it, and between me putting my binos up, turning around, grabbing my window mount with my spotter, putting it on, he bedded down. So I had to pick him back up, and he was with does, so I didn't have to work too hard to find him again. But then we left for 5 minutes, came back. I was like, I want to see if he's staying up again. And he was gone. Him and his does left. So the moment I came around the corner and stopped the truck, he was like, I got a bed. And then the moment the truck left, him and his girls left. They took no time at all to leave, too. So I think they get so used to the sound of cars, and they are like, when a car stops, they're like, oh, no, I gotta hide somewhere. Where if you just drive past, like we've talked about, where if one guy's driving and the other's a shooter, you drop him as you are slowly driving so the deer doesn't get nervous because you're not stopping. You're just kind of creeping along.
Yep.
And then you take off and the hunter's hidden in a brush, and then the deer goes back to feeding because like, that car left.
Yeah. And that's exactly what we were doing in Wyoming for antelope. Because antelope, they bed in the wide open. They're all about eyesight, right? And so where we were hunting Wyoming, it's such a game-rich environment. So, like, I had a lot of opportunities, let's put it that way. But, like, it's the same way. Chris, when he was driving by, he's like, there's an antelope bedded right there. You have 5 seconds to get out of this car. And, like, he won't just drop you off right in the wide open. He'll drive to a point where there's a contour blocking the antelope. And he's like, get out right now.
Yep.
And so I would get out, and then I would blow the stock. And then I get back in. And then,
we all do it. Don't worry.
And then we repeated that cycle for probably like 20 times. And when I finally was just like, I'm done bow hunting antelope. Like, I don't even care if there's any more antelope. I'm done.
Bow hunting these open land is tough. That's what I do. Very thankful my wife is a great shot, so she can fill my freezer and I can miss 8 times the season or blow 15 stocks a year. But that's, I think, the fun in it is having to put everything together. It's not just looking and, I spotted deer 200 yards away, I'm going to shoot it. It is playing the wind. It's using your topography to move through this land. It is using your brush. It is using all your senses and making sure everything is perfect to be able to get that close.
And we talked about this a little bit with Austin, but this is one of the unique things of Central Washington where you get to experience that game-rich environment. Like we're talking about still hunting through sage here, and a lot of places in the state, that would feel like an absolute waste of time because of the deer density. But knowing how many deer are around that area, you know that there's the population to support that. Or like you talk about with late season, there are some units out there that offer over-the-counter rut hunting for archery hunters in Washington, mule deer. You know, do your own research and figure those out. But those are opportunities where you may get to go on multiple stalks in a day, at the bare minimum, multiple stalks in a season, and actually get to start to practice that.
If I hunt late season and I don't get to see a shooter buck or put a stalk on at least two shooter deer a day, I call it a terrible day. Because it's, as you said, such a rich environment where I can, if I go to a spot and I glass and I'm like, there's no deer here, I will drive to another spot because I'm like, well, this is a waste of my time. Go to a new spot, glass, nothing. Go to a new spot, glass. Go to a new spot, 6 bucks are all together. I'm like, all right, we're going to make a play here, blow that stock, go to another spot. It's a super rich environment.
And that's the one thing that's quite literally how I found this spot last year when I was doing my doe hunt, is it's kind of like a double-edged sword in the fact that like when you hunt these units where you don't have a lot of public land and you don't have private access, it forces you to drive. Again, we've talked about like you can't just necessarily glance over this little piece of public. There's a lot more to it than what meets the eye, but at some point you would think that there'd be a doe standing in the skyline or something super obvious, right? So if you don't see one right then and there, like, yeah, just go check the next piece of parcel. And we went through quite a bit of public land before we landed on this piece of public where we're like, oh, there's where all the deer are. Granted, yeah, we saw plenty of deer on private, but that's the one thing that I found kind of fun where like you never really stuck to one spot. Like you were always on the move and you used a truck to find the deer.
And that's what Nate learned when we were doing his dad's hunt, because I joined you for a day?
Yeah.
And we went to one spot. He's like, there's a buck. I go, it's on private. It's not going to move. Let's go somewhere else. He's like, but what if it does? It's only like 100 yards off this public piece. I go, he's not going to move. So we drove down this road. We're there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes? Yeah. Drove back. The deer was in the same exact spot. Didn't move an inch. And I go, he's not going to move. He's going to stay in that same spot. I go, we'll go find more shooter bucks. Don't worry about it. And we just kept moving and picking out deer here, figuring out which ones we could actually make a play on versus which ones, if we tried to make a play on, we were just going to blow them out completely.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're saying, the opportunity that this area of the state offers, that for all of the other guys, us guys, you know, that aren't used to that, we're used to, like, you find a legal deer most of the time, and, like, that's your opportunity. You got to figure out how to make it work on that
And
deer.
I think the reason why the opportunity is so good around those parts is simply because of the habitat.
Yeah.
Because when I was just driving around, I was looking and just observing what deer were around and what they were eating and what resources that they had, it made sense because when you're in the lowland, let's be honest, that's where I would deem you'd have some of the least harsh winters because they're lower elevation. Snow usually hits that last, obviously. And then on top of that, like, they don't really run out of feed given there's agriculture.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, they have things to eat year-round, whereas, like, they could be up here if they don't have a man-made farm or some kind and they're just trying to rely on natural stuff. It's pretty scarce sometimes, especially in the bad winters, right?
For sure.
And on top of that, because you have less bad winters, your survival rates of your fawns are simply better, right? And so I think that's one method. Again, I'm not a biologist. I'm just going based off of what I have seen and observed. And it's like you have a good, healthy population there because the environment supports it. Right, because what's the term called? Carrying capacity. Yep. They have a much higher carrying capacity around those parts than, say, up here in the mountains.
I tried whitetail hunting this year, and I'm used to seeing multiple deer a day, 20, 30, 40 deer a day, moving spots. I'd be happy to see one whitetail during whitetail hunting, and I was like, how do people do this? This is awful.
Well, the whitetail things it's true and not true. There are some days where Nate and I'm out there and we're like, man, there's a lot of deer out here. Some days, like last year, our last day of the season, we saw like 5 deer in the span of the whole day. It sucks. It's slow, right? But
Yeah.
but that's the nature of that hunt,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
You're hunting in an environment where it's a lot harsher and it's a lot harder for these deer to survive in.
For sure.
And so a lot of hunts, a lot of other over-the-counter hunts in Washington, you see your deer, you find a shooter deer, you make your plan to get to it, and then you execute that plan. And other deer a lot of times are not a factor in that plan. This is something that you do have to think about in central Washington.
100%.
Especially if you're spotting deer from any sort of distance. If I see a deer a mile away, I don't think about other deer between me and that deer. If you see a deer a mile away and you're executing a stalk that is not like driving around to a different point, but actually like closing a mile distance or so to that deer, you're thinking about other animals in that area, right?
I'm stopping probably, I'd say, every 75 to 100 yards and making sure there's not another deer up this draw or down this draw or up this angle that I couldn't see before, because I can't tell you how many stalks I have blown because I wasn't careful enough paying attention to what was in front of me. I was so fixated, and that's something I've learned over the years is you can't just be fixated on the deer you're going after. You have to pay attention to everything, because there is going to be that deer bedded right there. Run straight to the other deer and bust it out.
So speaking on that, let's say in this case, let's talk stock planning. You glass up a deer that's bedded, I don't know, 800 yards away, and he's bedded in a spot where you know you can get close and take a shot. First question is, at what distance would you say that you're trying to stay out of his line of sight? Is it right then on the spot, 800
The
yards
whole
away?
time.
The whole time.
These deer are very jumpy. You skyline yourself and they're done. They
So-
will be gone.
So regardless of how far they are, the first thing you want to do is get out of sight.
Yep.
Find a way where he can't see you moving
So
in.
an example of this is my very first year archery hunting. I watched a doe or a buck chase this doe for probably 20 minutes from my truck. The moment I opened my truck door, that buck put his attention on me. I was like, how do you see me? Because they were probably 900 yards away. So I went around my truck, crawled on the ground to where I could get into a draw, and then I stood up, walked down the draw, all the way to the bottom, came back around and worked my way up to this buck. And I was like, he's going to push his doe down to the bottom of the draw, which he did, and I missed the deer because I'm just that great of a shot. As soon as I see a deer, I try to stay out of his line of sight no matter how far it is, because they are so jumpy. They're hunted hard. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that go out there and hunt, a lot of weekend warriors, as we call them. But there's a lot of people that hunt. They are very pressured. So the moment they see you, they're like, yep, I'm out.
We did a good job and spent a good bit of time painting a really good picture of these deer. You know, lowland, high density, lots of bucks, even if, you know, there's a lot of 2 points in there.
2 points.
But you can't have a good thing and have it be all good things. There are difficulties with this hunt for sure.
You jump coyotes a lot, too. They will also
People-
spook your deer.
Coyotes. My dad was not this last year, but the year before, muzzleloader hunting out in that area, and he shot a cougar. And not to say that those aren't issues in other areas of the state, but when you have the open country and the less, less topography in the sense that you're not hunting a draw of a mountain range, but you can see a lot of roads and stuff. You have a lot of people, and these deer, like you just said, are highly pressured. And so using pressure to hunt these animals and using pressure to your advantage is going to be pretty advantageous to you throughout the season. And this is where I think spending a lot of time around these deer throughout the year and getting to know their habits and their patterns and their behaviors is very helpful.
It's really crazy to, like, if you can sit in your truck and glass, do it. The moment you get out of that car or truck or whatever you're using, they know. They know the moment that door opens, they're like, oh, nope, not doing this. But if you sit in your truck, they don't seem bothered at all because they know nothing's going to happen while you're in your truck. But the moment you get out, they're like, what are you doing? Who are you? Why are you here?
So in those instances, let's say you're driving by and there's a buck that you want to go after and he's in a draw. And what's your play? Do you say, all right, I'm just going to drive far enough where he can't hear my truck anymore, park my car, and then come back? Or what's your play on to make a move on a buck like that?
It really depends on where he's bedded. 2025, so last year when I shot my mule deer buck, my buddy dropped me off way up top, drove his truck back and parked and sat in his truck the whole time. So the deer were just like, okay, this guy's just watching us. Where I was sneaking up behind the deer and they had no idea I was there. If I'm by myself, yeah, I will drive my truck to where they can't see me, they can't hear me, and then I will hike however far I have to be able to make that play. It just depends the setup.
Yeah, because
really.
I asked that because obviously an elk is completely different, right? And I'm not necessarily going to be talking about the same thing here, but the elk that I shot in 2022, my Rosie elk, I mean, that hunt is everybody's road hunting. People are just driving in trucks looking at clear cuts, right? And when I was coming out, I mean, he was standing in the middle of the clear cut. And not having ever done that hunt before, I was like, what do I do? Like, do I just park my truck in the middle of the road right here and get out and shoot him? Or is he going to run? So obviously, like, I was like, I'm not going to do that. Like, let me just roll past him. Because before I got to them, there was a truck in front of me that had literally passed the elk like 1 minute before I rolled up. That's why I was so dumbfounded. I'm like, there's a truck that just rolled past this elk. And so I drove a little bit back, got my gun, walked back. He was still standing. I shot him. But then in those instances, it's like, I don't know if I parked there and just got out, would the elk cover in? But I think that's a completely different animal than what you're talking about.
I think it's the same concept, though. I think they're so used to the road hunters and they're so used to people just driving by that they're like, well, if the car's driving by, it's not going to bother me. To where you stop and you get out of your vehicle, they're like, oh, this guy's not just driving by. He's going to try to do something, so I got to go.
Yeah, because it's a question I always think about. I'm like, what would happen if I just literally parked right there on the spot where like I can see him and he can see me, and I try to get my gun? Because keep in mind, at that point, my gun was still in the bag. I had my ammo was still in the box. Like I had to get everything from scratch to go back and shoot that elk, right? So I had to take quite a bit of time before I shot him. But I just asked that because I don't spend a lot of time road hunting. Like I really don't. Nate, most of the time when we hunt together, it's you park at a trailhead or you park off the side of the road and you start hoofing it, right? So we don't really have expertise in, oh, there's a buck right there. Like, how are we going to shoot him without spooking him from the truck?
Definitely, biggest thing is do not stop.
If someone were to hasn't done this hunt before, one of these hunts being mule deer in the lowlands or in sage country of Washington, what are some things that they can do that we've talked about here, just to kind of summarize, to kind of give them a little edge? Because there's going to be a lot of people doing it and there's going to be a lot of pressure. One thing that we haven't talked about that comes to my mind is maybe being willing to do an archery or a muzzleloader hunt or somewhere where there's less people willing to do that hunt because of lower odds and a more difficult hunt.
That's why I archery hunt. That's why a lot of my buddies have moved to muzzleloader hunt, because you do have the lower odds and less pressure. Where rifle, as I said, you can spot a deer from 300, 400, 500 yards away if you're a good shot and not have to do much. So definitely be willing, have an open mind to that muzzleloader, to that bow season. Even try to get that multi-season so you can do a little bit of each and see which one you prefer, see which one works better for you and your lifestyle. Because obviously everybody works. Everybody has different lifestyles. It just depends on how much time you are able to spend doing this.
Areas that have a high density of roads, it's still worth it to get out and be not in the car, even if you're in between two roads. There's animals that you're missing if you're driving.
For sure. I've found very few spots that I have not been able to find a deer, whether it be morning, night, middle of the day, bedded in spots where roads are 300-400 yards apart, but you can see the road from the road you're on, and there's still deer in there. They just get so used to the traffic that they know when to bed, when to move, kind of thing.
And they probably have some repeat beds where they just know nobody ever picks them out.
You can definitely tell those beds too, because they're more dug out, they're deep, they're behind sage. I've seen beds under sage, like they've dug it completely under to where
we saw that too.
Yeah, we did.
They will just hide under the sage to where there's no way you could see them.
And when we say no way, I mean there's no way you can see them.
Literally no way. You could have the best glass known to man. And the only way you're going to see them is if you had like a heat sensor on or something.
Yeah, and one of the most deceiving things about sage is when you look at sagebrush from up top, you see like it almost like flowers out. But when you go to the root systems, especially when there's like a clump, it's like a vase where it thins out the bottom. So there's plenty of room for deer to bed underneath. But up top, it just looks so thick because it flowers out.
One of the best pieces of advice I've ever been given was nothing in nature has a straight line. So where those deer are bedded, their back is pretty straight, or their neck's going to be straight, if you see something that looks like it could be straight or off, it's probably not a sagebrush.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to be some kind of animal or something along those lines, because nothing in nature is straight.
Like Nate and I, we emphasize glass a lot, but this is one of the hunts where I would re-emphasize that
Glass
a lot. And not only do I say glass, but stabilize it. I think the best thing you can do in this country is glass off of a tripod.
Yep.
Whether that's a binocular or picking it apart with a spotting scope. I think that your glass in this context is going to be your best friend.
And you're going to be looking for parts of a deer.
Most of the time, you're not going to see the full deer. You're going to catch, as I said, an ear flick, an antler move, and that's all you'll see. You won't see the whole thing.
And I think this is one of the things where you kind of just have to go based off of faith to believe, like, I'm not seeing anything right now because maybe it's middle of the day and the deer are bedded. And I just have to be willing to sit here until it's time for them to get up.
You have to learn patience.
Because last year when Nate and we were sitting there, I mean, we thought about leaving around 3 o'clock because we were like, we just don't know if it was worth it to sit here all day. And I'm glad we stuck it out, because that last 45 minutes of light, once that sun starts to dip, it's like started crawling with animals. And they popped out in spots where we were like, what? We were
watching it all day.
We were looking there the whole day, and they just like popped up like that.
I've been there. We've talked about carrying cribbage boards, like little packable cribbage boards.
Oh, yeah?
That way, while you're sitting there during the middle of the day or whatever, and you're like, well, I don't want to go back to camp, whatever. You pull out a little cribbage board out of your pack and play cribbage.
You got to keep yourself occupied. Yeah, this is definitely one of the hunts where I think the more time you spend out there, the higher your odds of actually pulling it together.
And the more you're going to learn. I mean, we all fail. Every hunter has failed. Even if they say they haven't, they have. We all miss. It's just learning from those mistakes, learning from each hunt. Oh, okay, the mule deer bed here and they get up at this time, or they want to be close to those water troughs, or they like this draw. It's just trial and error.
And if there's one thing I can leave the viewers, if you've never done this hunt, I mean, we've talked about a lot of the general ideas and tips and tactics of how to approach this hunt. If you're rifle hunting, learn to shoot off a tripod. If I could go back and do my hunt last year, I would probably get a tripod that I can shoot off of, because the problem with hunting that quote-unquote flat land and tall grass is if you're shooting off the ground, like on a bipod, I had such a hard time getting my muzzle over the grass.
Yep.
I spent so much time just messing around trying to get an angle to the doe I was shooting at because the grass was so tall. But if I had a tripod, like, that was done.
Tripods are nice. We use packs a lot too.
Packs. Well, I use the packs too, but the problem with the packs is like, I'm just not stable. Well, because my deer was like 450 yards.
Okay. Yep.
Which is a little too far for, like, when I take a shot, I don't want any movement. Right?
Yeah.
And the pack, I mean, I could probably make it work like 300 yards or so, but at 450, I'm not taking chances, right?
My wife used a pack at I think it was 453, and it was on a bedded buck. And she just and I was like, I don't know how you do it, because I would have missed. I mean, let's be honest.
I think it's doable if you practice, but I never practice shooting off of a pack. I never do it.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
So shooting sticks or a tripod or something to elevate yourself.
Yeah, I think if you have a tripod for the front of your rifle, a secondary tripod to put up against your rear, the butt of your rifle, is probably going to do you justice.
Or even if you use, I've seen people use hiking sticks.
Or hiking sticks.
You can use those as long as you practice shooting with them, because you're going to have to hold them with one and then be able to shoot with the other. But I've seen that be done too.
Yeah. That's the biggest thing that I would leave these people with. If you're hunting this type of country or you're planning to hunt with it, you should probably practice shooting off a tripod.
The other thing I'd leave them with is, if you see a buck, don't be afraid to use Onyx and use that LiDAR detector to give you the topography. That is what you're looking at.
I've talked about the LiDAR
a lot.
Just a lot, yeah. And just in our intro, when we talk about the people that support the podcast, I talk about the LiDAR feature because it's a newer feature on Onyx.
Love
it. Works well on the
LiDAR.
Sage. I've only used it in context of Northeast Washington or mountain country. But out on the Sage,
it works well. Everywhere I've used it, it works well, and I've even found spots where I'm like, I didn't even know it was there until I started using the LiDAR, and I'm like, what is this? This is a game changer, because it's a little nook that I could crawl through, or the deer could crawl through.
Nate, for the people who don't know what you're talking about, explain to them in simple terms what LiDAR is.
Yeah, so you have layers on mapping software. any mapping software, whether that's Google Maps or Google Earth, but Onyx specifically has different layers. And so there's a satellite layer, which shows you just imagery, just what the satellite picture's taken. You have your topography layer, which is just your topo lines, like any paper map you would get off the store, which has your normal, like, monotone landscape that has your topography lines. And then there's a hybrid, which is usually the two overlaid, the satellite and the topography. What LiDAR is it's a 2D image of your map, of your ground, and they basically make the topography lines with shading on your mapping so that you can see these little landscape features outside of the topography, because you can't see any landscape features strictly here in the 2D mapping, not using 3D stuff. You can't see landscape features under trees and things like that with satellite imagery. However, with the LiDAR, this works apparently great for out in the sage. The context I've used it in is like north slopes, or a lot of times all slopes in Northeast Washington that have heavy timber cover. You may have topography lines, but even topography lines are...
They lie.
They lie. They are only accurate to an extent.
Yep.
You can pretty easily have a 10 or 20 foot rock wall, and if it's that small, which it's impassable to a hunter, it's not going to show up on a topography line.
Yep.
But specifically, little, like, I call them micro benches, tiny little benches, things that aren't going to show up on a topography line, things that's not a full ridge or a full draw or a full on cliff. To be able to stack topography lines really close to each other and actually show you that, LiDAR has been really helpful.
I use LiDAR in 3D, especially when I'm at home and I'm like, okay, I want to hunt this area. I'll go home and pull up my iPad or my computer, and I'll use LiDAR and really like dig into the topography in that area to be able to be like, okay, and then I'll mark it on my Onyx, be like, I want to hit this bench, or I want to hit this micro bench, or I need to run this little saddle or whatever it is.
Yeah, the LiDAR basically just puts your map in a much more detailed format.
Yeah, it's like, especially in the 3D mode, it would be like if you were to take the landscape, shave everything down to just the earth, and it shows you that. So you don't have the pictures of what everything looks like, but you can look and see all the little small topography
It shows
features.
you the contours of what's actually there.
Yeah.
So like if there's a rock there, with your normal topo lines, it wouldn't show anything. It just shows 1,800 feet, 1,820 feet.
Yeah.
With the LiDAR, it'll show like a shaded patch there. Like there's an object of some sort.
Yeah.
That's here. That's what this shading.
And a lot of times, just like you'll be on Onyx and be like, man, it's incredible how they know there's a spring in these spots. Like how am I 15 miles in the backcountry and then I can walk within 3 foot of a spring that is marked on Onyx? It's the same thing with LiDAR. Like it will show, it's like, how does it know that there's this tiny little rock outcropping here?
Have you ever walked up on a spring, but it wasn't actually a spring?
Oh, many times.
That's so frustrating. When I'm like,
in fact, that was most of our 2022 high buck.
I think
hunt.
some
I'm like,
of those,
I gotta get there. I know there's gonna be water here. There's a spring here, and then I get there. I'm like,
yeah.
This is so disappointing.
It's funny you bring that up because I think some of those springs, depending on what year it is, they just ultimately dry out or they don't seep out, right? And so like there is an underground spring, but sometimes it's not enough water to actually protrude the ground. And so that's why, man, on X, if you haven't used it for whatever reason at this point, maybe you're new to hunting, it is incredible the technology that they have in that app, because like we just talked on one feature and we haven't even scratched the surface of what
there's so many more.
I think we'll probably end up doing a podcast on
just on
X in the future here.
It's incredible.
On the tools and layers that we use. If you guys want to hear that, let us know.
Yeah,
I think we'll probably do that just because
that would be a fun.
I feel like I know Onyx well, and then I talk to people and they show me something that I had absolutely no clue existed.
Yeah.
All to say, you're using these features out in quote unquote flat country, which is not flat country, but what people think about is kind of this lowland flat country, and you're still using Onyx to your advantage out there. And you're using online mapping, topography mapping, and LiDAR mapping.
So I bounce between Google Earth, Onyx. I bounce between those a lot because sometimes you can pick up something on one that you can't pick up on another.
Yeah, Google Earth, they have higher image quality. So if you just want a satellite look, Google Earth has higher resolution.
Yeah.
On top of that, Google Earth also stays more up to date with taking photos.
Yep.
Onyx does lag a little bit. Like
I will.
You can
one-up that,
request a
though.
picture, though, if you pay for it.
I will
Yeah.
one up that though. I will say that Google Earth has the highest and most recent photos of
Yes.
anything out there.
Google Earth, if you
More
just
than
want the
any
sharpest
third-party- yeah.
detail, Google Earth is the way to go. But Google Earth does not have the same features that Onyx. So using the two together is the best way to go.
For sure.
So this week was a little different, obviously. Like we've talked about high country and big mountain mule deer for the past couple weeks, but this is such a big area of our state with so much opportunity.
I mean, if you look at Washington in general, I would say that more than half of the eastern half of Washington
Yeah.
is just ag fields and lowland.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you have a little bit of Cascades and a little bit of the Selkirk and a little bit of the Blue Mountains, but everything else, lowland sagebrush agriculture type stuff.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so don't overlook this hunt. Again, one of the biggest hurdles that we talk about is access.
Yeah.
If you don't have a buddy that owns land, you're going to battle the idea of just simply getting land to hunt. And, granted that it's small public pieces of property, public land, and good people, like it can get pretty crowded easily. But again, I think that's everywhere per se.
And definitely have plan A, B, C, D, and E, because you will show up to a spot. Like I said with my wife's buck, person there. You'll show up to another spot, person there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to move. Don't be afraid to adjust your plan. Be mobile. That's the biggest thing, is just be mobile. Don't be stuck on one spot. Be like, I have to hunt here.
Yeah.
Be mobile. Be ready to move. Be willing to move.
Mm-hmm. I don't really hear people talking about this specific herd of mule deer that we have here in Washington where people hunt scabland. I know a lot of people do it, but there's not a lot of information about it.
Mm-mm.
So that's kind of why we wanted Andrew here, because he, like I said, he's kind of specializes in the whole thing. So we wanted his perspective. I mean, Nate and I, we dabble a little bit into it, but I wouldn't really say we have enough knowledge or enough experience to really talk on it, because we can talk about what we experienced, but we haven't validated it because we don't hunt it enough.
For sure.
But obviously having you here, I mean, you practically live there. So you have literally every single day experience.
Yeah.
Looking
I
at
mean,
these
there's
deer.
even mornings where I will wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning in the summer and go check them out before I go to work, and then I'll go to work for the day.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's sweet, man.
Well, shall we close it here?
I
End
think
it on
yeah.
fast facts.
And it on fast facts.
Do you have a fast fact for us?
I do not.
All right. He brought 2 trivia duels.
Actually,
No,
this is not a fast fact, but I want to. You fish a lot. I want to get your opinion on this.
Okay. Okay.
Do fish see water?
Do fish see water? I would say they see water, but I think it's the same way we see air.
So they see the particles, but they don't see the actual water.
Yeah, but I don't, because if you think about it, air has particles.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily say we see the air particles. I would say the same thing with fish.
they see the stuff float in the water, and they see like water clarity, just
Yeah.
like we see a foggy day.
Yeah, I would say like they don't necessarily see the water, but they would see.
But you were
things flowing
talking
in.
about trout, how great trout vision is.
There
how
is.
much they rely on their vision.
Because I mean, if you have a vibrant piece of power bait floating in the clear water, I mean, I know they can see that.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that they see the little particles of water that are just always on their face. But again, I'm not a fish, so
All right. Next
I don't
question.
know.
Do crabs think fish fly?
I don't. Perhaps. I mean, if anything's elevated above you at some point, is that not what the definition of flying is? Because flying is you're elevated, right?
I'm not sure crabs think.
Yeah, I don't think they really think either. I don't know,
boy.
folks.
That's my facts for you.
I think that's a question for the viewers. Do crabs think fish fly, and can fish see water? I don't know.
Guess we'll find out.
We'll find out. We'll go by majority rules. We'll see what the folks said. We'll go by whatever they agree to. Well, Nate, do you have one for us?
I do. Yeah. We didn't really dive into shed hunting today much. Maybe
No.
that'll be another discussion for the future, but Andrew's a big shed hunter. I have gotten really into it the last couple of years. It's a fun time to hike around in the air. So this goes around shed hunting. And just like when we're out on those hunts and looking at a burn and being like, there's got to be a deer in there. I think the same thing when I'm out there hiking around for sheds. I'm like, man, there's got to be a shed in here. So this is to back that up. In 2020, Auburn University released a study about the percentage of sheds picked up by shed hunters. They released this after 7 years of studying, where they annually shed hunted a 430-acre managed piece of property that was surrounded by a 10-foot high fence. So it was a very controlled piece of 430-acre property. This was 40% low grass pasture, 49% woods, and 11% scrubland. Now, they broke down the woods into like hardwood versus deciduous versus all this different, but 49% woods. And on this property, there were 60 whitetail bucks. After shed season, the property was searched every year for 7 years in a methodical grid manner. And at the end of the study, the average was every year they found 38% of the sheds on that piece of property, leaving 62% of the sheds never found.
That honestly doesn't surprise me at all.
It doesn't surprise me, but you think about 430 acres is not quite 1 by 1 mile. So it's a lot of property, but surrounded by high fence in a controlled area with known 60 bucks and less than 50%, less than 40% annually if sheds were ever found.
Do they give the time when they went out to go find these sheds? Is it like right when they're shedding?
No, so it was before spring, the majority of spring growth, but after shed season. They said like last week of March, I think, the first week of April
Is when they went out.
when they went out to shed hunt.
Kind of fresh.
It was so they were picking up fresh sheds, and then I also don't know if they took into account more than 1-year-old sheds. I think this was sheds of those years deer that they found shed.
So you're talking about like spikes.
No, talking about like 2-year-old
fresh.
sheds, like hard whites and
Fresh
chalks.
sheds.
I don't think they counted those. I could be wrong. I'm thinking they're talking about every year they went out and saw how many of the 60 bucks they could pick up the sheds off of. And then this makes sense. This is common sense, but the distribution was they picked up a much higher percentage of the larger mature deer than the smaller immature deer. So it was like 51% or 52% of deer over 4.5 years old they picked up. And then the younger spikes, 2 points, the younger deer, they picked up a very low percentage of.
Late March, early April, in my opinion, is pretty late for whitetail shed hunting.
For sure.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at
Because whitetails shed early.
Yeah.
Like January.
Even I've had bucks shed in December, so that's like a 4-month span of squirrels chewing them up and
So
even
there was
hiding
that
them.
talk about in the study too about it them being pressed into the dirt, scraped under leaves, eaten by squirrels, things like that. So that's not saying all the sheds still existed, but it does make you think. If you knew that you were walking onto a
So
less
what
than
you're
a square
saying
mile
is, I am a great shed hunter. They
What
just
you're saying is
weren't
it just-
there.
It just reinforces the idea, like every single time I find a shed, I think, wow, like that bull or that buck was literally standing right here and shook its head and this horn fell off and I'm the first person to find this and I happened to walk up on it, and every single time it seems completely improbable.
Yeah.
It's the coolest thing.
Could you imagine if sheds did the same thing deer did, where you get close and they run away?
Well, I don't think anybody would shed hunt then.
Yeah.
I sure wouldn't.
I don't think I'd want to go after sheds. Seeing a piece of shed antler just flown away is kind of it's kind of like witchcraft in a way. All right, well that'd
be easier to spot them though.
that would, but hey, I guess if there's a shed hunting season at that point, I don't mind going. All right, well my fast fact is a little bit different, and it has to do with, I guess, a continuation of my trivia duel earlier. I mentioned Komodo dragons. So here's my fast fact. Asexual reproduction is considered very rare, as it occurs in less than 1% of vertebrate species. Among these vertebrates, asexual reproduction is the most common among reptiles. In the case of Komodo dragons, females can asexually reproduce through parthenogenesis. Unlike sexual reproduction, where a sperm and an egg merge to create a viable embryo, parthenogenesis is the result of a female's egg that fuses with a copy of itself. So this results in an embryo with only the mother's DNA. With parthenogenesis in Komodo dragons, the offsprings are always male. Meaning, if a female Komodo dragon undergoes asexual reproduction, she can then breed by her sons, essentially. And this often happens in islands, oftentimes, where there are no Komodo dragons, and this female Komodo dragon somehow ended up there, and they are now trying to colonize that island. Now, of course, This dilutes the genetic diversity of the Komodo dragons because they all share the same genetics as the mother. However, what is unique to Komodo dragons is they can also reproduce sexually. They're one of the very few animals that can reproduce both asexually and sexually.
Wow, that is crazy.
Yeah. So, I don't know, just a little bit different world.
What a crazy survival evolution.
Yeah, Komodo dragons are scary.
They are very scary.
So, I never want to go to Komodo Island.
Well, folks, hopefully you guys enjoyed this week's talk. I know these Mule Deer March podcasts have been long ones.
They're not long enough, but we'll scratch them at 2 hours.
We'll scratch them at 2 hours. We've enjoyed sitting here talking with you guys. Hopefully you guys learned something today, learned something about the scablands of Eastern Washington, learned that it's not just a flat wasteland. It's got some pretty cool animals out there. We've enjoyed sitting here talking with Andrew, someone who really, truly lives and breathes those animals and is around them every day. We have one more week of Mule Deer March for you guys.
That's it.
And then we are moving on, but we are very excited that one. I won't say we saved the best for last because we've had some fantastic guys in studios, but we got a good one coming next week.
We had 5 of the best of the best.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So anyways, we will see you again next week for our last installment. Have a good week, guys.